Testing, testing, testing. There you go.
Hi, welcome everybody to the May 10th Planning Board. We tend to start, as those of you who know, with a kind of a training session from 7 o'clock to about 7:30ish. So we're going to do that now. John, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. We discussed last time having an open discussion about what sort of training ideas and that you might have for future sessions. And we thought we'd do that today. I did want to update you on the Main Street Advisory Committee report, the Access Committee. They issued an advisory report to the council and presented it 2 weeks ago, I think, on Monday. And you've seen most of it in parts over time. We've previewed it, got feedback. We had a long session with the city council. They were receptive. You can see Main Street's being striped, presumably with the recommendations of the Access Committee in mind, to get more spaces out there. So if you have any questions, it's online. It's not on the city website, except if you look at the workshop agenda for that night when the presentation was done, you can see it there. If you're curious, I can send you a copy or whatever. But if you have any questions or whatever, otherwise I think we should move on to, a discussion of what sort of training sessions you might want in the future, or what sort of discussions, or how do you want to play with the first half hour of your next meetings?
Well, let's kind of go around the board and see how everybody feels. So.
I'd have to say I find things like your updates about the Main Street Access Committee very helpful, because I don't have the the bandwidth and the time to figure out what else is happening on the city level. So that is, I think affordable housing issues is something that would interest and be helpful to me as a member on the board. If there are ways that we can coordinate with efforts on the county level. I know there's I just did a webinar on affordable housing in the county, and there seem to be some interesting opportunities coming up down the road in the not too distant future.
Yeah, the county just finished a housing needs assessment for all the communities.
Yeah, that was the webinar.
Dutchess County, yeah.
Yeah. That's all that comes to mind right now, but as the board goes through, I'll ponder some more.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because actually I happened to see that in the agenda, and I read the housing report, and it included a lot of stuff that I didn't know whether any of that research had been done, like the analysis of how much housing exists, what the demand is, and then sort of following the whole arc through where they were talking about what the affordable housing commitment, they had a certain term that they used for each community in the county might be, and so there were actual numbers, there were goals that they generated. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert to know if it's precisely, there's differences of opinion of how they came to that number, but I thought it was really helpful, and that there was kind of a number given, right? That if we, of a community of 12,000 that has a certain amount of affordable housing now, this is, if we want to contribute to helping the problem with the expensive housing, this is what you can do. This is the burden that you should bear as a community in order to help out your citizens. And I thought that was really useful. And it was like 5 units per year, something like that, and 200 units over another period of time. Tell me if I'm wrong with the numbers, but it seemed like an achievable number. That if we planned it and thought about interventions, either subsidized housing, there are many, many ways to do it, and there are people with expertise in that field that we can be pretty certain that it's going to actually have an impact to help people based upon all the experience that people have working in this. So any further information detailing other communities' experiences, right, and the outcomes, I'd love to learn more so that we can focus our efforts.
I was surprised how low the numbers were, because I think the need is much greater than those numbers represented.
Yeah,
That was weird.
that
And
was-
East Fishkill had like 4 times the amount of demand, and it might be they were using some sort of multiplier of like how much they've done already, right?
I think it's the distribution. Yeah,
Distribution.
Yeah.
they were trying to work out distribution and lack thereof
So there's-
historically.
They're trying to distribute the number of units over the entire
Yeah,
30 communities, and the ones that have lower numbers now are expected to do a little more in the future. And Beacon has a lot of affordable housing units as a
Right.
percentage of its
as
total
does
population.
Poughkeepsie.
Right, but I mean, there's other aspects to it, which is that because it's potentially, you can potentially live without a car someday.
Yes.
Or with fewer cars in Beacon, that it's in some ways more affordable, and that that there's a benefit to having that broad range of housing pricing in Beacon for a lot of different types of incomes. Because in East Fishkill, you have to have a car, and if you're a family, you need 2 cars. And it's difficult to be poor in the country, I think, anymore, I guess is what I'm saying, in the suburbs. And there's many benefits in denser communities.
I've seen these housing studies come and go, and they always project, the town of Washington and the town of, Unionville and some of those more rural communities. And it never happens out there. And it really maybe shouldn't, because they don't have the transit services and they don't have the proximity to grocery stores and the things that you really should to have supportive services for affordable units. So that doesn't happen there. More likely to happen in the cities and in the tight-knit suburbs and villages. And so, if I was projecting for Beacon, I would project a higher number in terms of need, just based on the escalating rents, for one thing.
Lynn, please.
And I think, to some degree, hearing reports of what the Main Street Access Committee was doing served this purpose, but I would like in the future to continue to get training on innovations or lessons learned from other communities, whether it is about, Main Street preservation or just enhancing, the walkability and livability of cities, but to get a kind of a steady feed of innovative solutions or ways of looking at problems so that we're kind of just keeping up with our peers around the country. And even if it's a little bit, maybe, even if it seems a little bit too innovative for us to consider, I'd still like to know, where the zeitgeist is, what's happening, so that if there's something that we become aware of and we're like, hey, we need to do that here, or we need to look at that strongly here, we maintain an awareness of what the state of the practice is. That would be real useful. And something that's maybe even something that we could distribute the research responsibilities a little bit among the board if it takes a little more effort to do it.
Jill?
What was the question?
Just our training.
What would you like to see?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with the housing study and the Main Street stuff. What was yours?
Housing.
Housing, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll have to think about it.
Okay. Jason?
Are we asking, are we being asked to respond to the Main Street Access
No, we're
report?
asking,
or
what
just
would we
gen-
like to see at training?
Future training.
Future
Right,
training.
right,
Topics.
understood.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to comment on the Main Street Access report because I was on the committee, so I know how much work was put into it. I was on, and they met weekly, and I would encourage the city residents to actually read the report. It's 24 pages, has a lot of information about the history, and personally, I think more training about the history of Beacon could be helpful. There's a lot of information there about how Main Street changed over time, urban renewal changes, even just where Matawan and Fishkill Landing were separated. I didn't know that myself. It's North Chestnut Street is pretty much the border between the two towns. So a lot of interesting history in that report that I think residents would benefit from reading if they're going to, you know, sort of ask or respond to the changes that were proposed and why those changes were made. So again, I'd like to thank the committee for doing that report. I thought it was valuable.
Jill, any?
They're all really good suggestions. Something that popped into my mind listening to all this was I believe it's a William Faulkner quote, "The past is never dead, it's not even past," and the implications for that in terms of acknowledging Beacon's past and what it means for planning for the future. So, and that impacts all these things. So I think the linkage zone is a really good example of that from when it was, from my understanding, primarily an African-American community that was bulldozed during some misguided urban renewal during the 70s, is that correct?
Mostly 70,
And-
yes.
Yeah, and never rebuilt, or basically the community was never rebuilt to the way it was. And when we first moved to Beacon 18 years ago, my husband and I, and our house backs up to a house that was owned by the former pastor of the Springfield Baptist Church. And we heard from her daughter that there was still some bitterness there, that they had torn down their church there and really disrupted the community, which is still a very vibrant community, and they have the building here and now. But just the way that the built environment really is such an important part of building the otherwise invisible community aspects of living in a city, in a small city.
You may have to speak up a little bit.
I would say that something that I think is very important as part of the overall structure, what everybody's saying, is understanding the balance between what the board's capabilities are, and so that the community understands what our limitations are, because we have different previews. Everyone looks at things from a different optic view. And I think as the training happens, I think we need to understand those borders and those guidelines. They have to be very clear, because a lot of these things are very emotional, very impactful, and our board's power and our function is limited to a specific scope. And I think we need to always understand that and respect that, and so that the community can also understand that as part of what our training, and furthermore, as far as our impact to be able to help to initiate certain smart growth, smart changes. I think that becomes very, very important. And I think that as the board grows and becomes more members of the community and other people come, they could also take that on as a baton. Because I think one of the interesting things from a learning standpoint, looking at my tenure here, where we have come to where we are right now, the things we need to understand and learn has greatly changed. It significantly has shifted. And I think we need to stay in lockstep with those shifts while we look at and then address the things that become challenges that we face as the community changes. And I think that takes in consideration our past, our present, and as best as we can, looking towards our future. So I think those things need to be part of the collective learning process, so that we always stay within our own scope of what we can do. So, John, I'd like to get Mr. Russo's thought on what things you think would be very helpful for us. Because what's interesting, you know, our professionals are kind of in this interesting space. I'm saying this to the community also, because we often rely on them to give us recommendations, but I think they kind of operate in this mystical box And people really don't understand what that is and why that becomes an important. So I think, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, Randall, I think you had a very good point, understanding the board's limitations. I mean, you're exacted to do a job with codes that have been set by others. I think what everybody has said as far as the affordable housing, Main Street, how things are developing, you know, you may not have say in everything, but you can discuss those with projects that come in to maybe help implement some of that. Other things that we've been getting more into is the traffic impacts. Yeah, your city, you'd like to have a walkability to get around, and yeah, you have a train station right down below. The traffic coming in, when I came off the bridge, was backed up at least 4 blocks right now. So traffic is one thing we're looking at. As far as the environment, you know, we're dealing with one project where we have wetlands, disturbance to wetlands, you know, and mitigation. You know, the board has made it very clear that they want to see that mitigation occur within the city for the benefit of the residents. Stormwater is a big impact. The utilities themselves, you know, water, sewer, what do we have available to people? And what improvements can we do to the system to improve everything for everybody?
Yeah, the one other thought I had was, I feel like if there's a way that we can have better, or see if there's other, or what models are out there for interacting amongst different agencies in the city, because I feel like, for instance, we have a climate smart coordinator now who we could be getting, you know, information from on the vision that they're creating on what we need to do to make sure we're a resilient community in face of environmental changes, that I think would be important for us to bear in mind as projects come up.
Did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Nope, thank you.
John, final words on that?
Well, I think myself that the hottest topic and the greatest need is affordable housing at this point. And I think maybe I'll try to do something at the next meeting. The mayor instituted this at the beginning of this year, maybe it was the beginning of last year, sort of a whole laundry list of suggestions. And the council was supposed to take these up one at a time and go through them, and it got kind of bogged down and never really went anywhere. Now, the city is looking at its parking lots, its public holdings, and trying to come up with solutions where they can provide parking on the ground level and take care of the air rights, build 2 or 3 stories up over the parking so that they can do affordable housing designated, work with developers the way they worked with Westland Loft to create affordable housing in central locations where we have parking lots now that are unproductive and, you know, a drain on the tax base instead of a useful part of the city. So I think I'm working on, when I'm not working for you, I'm working on those sorts of scenarios, you know, what the Churchill lot would look like if you could increase the number of parking spaces on it on 2 levels using the hill and putting housing above it. It's in a prime location. You could double the number of spaces and have housing units, a mix of affordable and market rate housing units on that site as well. Same for the Henry Street lots.
You know, at least with Churchill, topographically, a structure like that would be a little bit kind of diminished in terms of its impact. It's still, you know, you're between Main Street and the Ridge Line, but, you know, when I hear about, you know, residential structures on top of parking garages, and I start envisioning those at places like Henry Street, or, yeah, I have a visceral reaction that isn't positive, you know, just kind of from an aesthetic standpoint, which is not the most important thing in the world, but
well, there's ways to do it, though. There's, and this could be a topic too. How do you deal with parking structures and not have them look like, you know, layer cakes of parking lots. There's green facades, there's historic facades that have been put on, examples from around the country I could show you. What a lot of people are doing now are liner buildings, 18, 20-foot wide residential units that are on the edge of the parking structure, and line it so that it looks like a housing development, but the interior is a layer or two of parking. So there's a lot of different ways you can deal with structured parking, and it helps pay for the parking. You know what? Parking itself is a drain on the economy in a lot of ways. There's no such thing as free parking. The citizens of Beacon are paying for the parking that's out there. There's over 9 acres of land that's publicly owned that's devoted to parking lot within walking distance of Main Street. 9 acres is a huge amount of value in central locations.
We've probably talked about this before, but I'd like to bring it up again, and that's just, again, looking at properties on, if there's any properties still in the Main Street area that are perhaps underutilized, or if there are anticipated changes coming where, for example, let's just say, hypothetically, a firehouse is going to be decommissioned or something, and it's going to create a potential developable area, or a scenario where someone comes in and purchases property that's one-story property on Main Street and says, I want to come in and build up 2 stories on top of this. I feel like we need to keep preparing ourselves for eventualities, and if looking at it reveals a concern that we could have an undesirable situation, then that would be a trigger for relooking at zoning. We've heard a lot of comments from the public about projects being too large on Main Street, that you're putting in kind of monolithic structures on a Main Street that's composed originally of a lot of individual lot buildings, cheek by jowl, with some neat details differentiating them from each other. I don't think we have anything in our toolkit to control the size of developments. And if that kind of gains momentum, where you have, like I said, if someone came in and bought a number of parcels that had the 1-story structure on Main Street and said, I'm going to build this all up to 3 stories, people's heads are going to explode in terms of what the visual impact is going to be and the level of change. And I don't feel like we're totally prepared for that eventuality, that we could get blindsided by it if it comes up on us faster than we expect. And there'll be no time at the point a project is being proposed to say, should we have tried to change zoning? Was there a desire on the part of the populace to do something different, but now it's like kind of too late? We're staring into the headlights.
I could just add one comment or observation. In my opinion, in addition to affordable housing, which obviously is an important long-term goal, I think, for consideration, I think our role as a board would be to sort of contemplate the future of our public space overall. And why do I say that? Because really we're the main arm that can do that. And this month, I think, is the anniversary of Olmsted's 200th birth, and there's a lot of events about his role in developing Central Park and parks. And it seems to me that a city needs to anticipate future development. So what would New York City be without Central Park if they didn't envision future development? And it seems to me that one of the things that we could do is to anticipate what Beacon would look like in 50 years, in 100 years, and where do we want to develop public space. In my opinion, it should be Main Street. Main Street should be strengthened in terms of a public access to the city, to the river and to the mountain. And basically, the whole thing needs to be a stronger access of public space, I think, in 100 years in the future.
We got 1 minute before we start.
Okay. A lot of communities are looking at no-build options as one of the alternatives to analyze when you're proposing like expensive or infrastructure things or other large developments. they should be compared against what the cost benefit is of either doing very small interventions or doing nothing. And that is sometimes really helps the decision-making process.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. We're going to start our official business here, but before we start the people's business, there's something I need to say, and it's to Etha. Today, for those of you who don't know, this is Etha's last planning board meeting. Thank you is such a shallow word when it comes to you, Etha, and what you have done for me personally, as my tenure on this board, for many of us members, and just for the city of Beacon. It is so difficult when you see a situation and sitting in a role and being afraid of it, which I was when I first came to this wonderful planning board. And I must say that you made this home. And it is with that deep, heartfelt thank you I say, although the words may seem shallow, I speak for myself. John and I were going back and forth, John Gunn, trying to figure out how do we put this to words, what can we say? And there aren't words to say when someone has been such a gracious part of this board and this community. But I do say from the board here, and I wanted to make sure it was in the records, to say thank you. No, you can't. It's fine. But thank you.
You're still working.
We're going to start with item number 1 on the agenda. Continued public hearing for SEQRA. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. My Etha's got, correct me again. Thanks, Etha. Let's have a motion to accept the minutes from last. Are there any modifications?
I had one minor comment that I emailed. I don't know if it was captured, but I think on the last month's minutes from 16 West Main, there was, I believe, that the comment was that they were switching from driving piles to drilling piles.
Yes.
And I don't think it wasn't captured correctly
Yeah,
in the
Amanda
minutes.
called me on that today,
Okay.
so she was
All right,
fixing
so
that.
cool. Thank you.
Okay. Motion to accept? Second?
Seconded.
I did.
Lynn, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 1 on the agenda, continued public hearing for SEQRA environmental review on application for subdivision and site approval, Beacon Views Townhouses, 40 units, Conklin Street, submitted by Beacon Views LLC.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Richard Cantor. I'm with the firm of Tian and Constantino on behalf of the applicants. If I might, if it's not out of turn, from the applicant side, Etha is wow.
Mm-hmm.
I've known her for years, and the courtesy, the ability, the everything, it's just wow. So I just want you to hear that from the applicant's side as well.
Thank you.
We were last here, I believe, at your December meeting. And since then, we've achieved, we think, a lot on the key issues that were outstanding. One of the key issues that was outstanding was access, vehicular access to the property. John and others have indicated that they were hoping we would be able to get through to Townsend on the 13-lot subdivision that was next door to us. And I am now told that that subdivision was purchased by an active developer, a bond was put up, the street will be put in, and our plans will show us going in and out of that new public street. So I think that's one significant piece. A second significant piece, and we have Jim Bates here, who's our wetlands man, if you want somebody who really knows what they're talking about. But I'm told that our engineer reduced the lot count by 3 lots from 40 to 37, which is enabling us to do our 1-to-1 wetland mitigation on site, which I think was another point that your engineer and your planner were big about, and we're able to do that. I don't know if there are any open engineering issues that are left. So we've covered mitigation for wetland, we've covered access. Those were the big ones. I'm hoping that when you're finished tonight, that you will consider closing the public hearing on SEQRA, and that you will consider asking your counsel or your planner or engineer to draw up a proposed determination of significance for your next meeting, hopefully a negative declaration. That's your call, obviously. We don't think there are any significant adverse impacts that have come to the surface. And we would also ask that for the next meeting, you schedule and open public hearings on preliminary subdivision and on site plan approval. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to the engineer and the wetland consultant and see if what I said makes sense, and I assume that Mr. Russo and your planner will chime in when I think it's appropriate.
Hi, Adam Thyberg from Insight Engineering, Surveying, Landscape Architecture, PC. So just to hone in on something that Richard had alluded to, what was impacted in terms of the site plan, the revision to the site plan, is the 3 units that were eliminated that had previously been proposed in the northeast corner. The removal of those units has opened up space for additional mitigation in that area. We've also introduced a new retaining wall, which has somewhat reduced our disturbance. That put together with the mitigation that had previously been proposed to the south of the property gets us to the 1-to-1 mitigation, as Richard mentioned. Just to make sure that it's clear, so those hatched areas there in the northeast corner, that's the new area of mitigation, and of course in the southern end there, the hatched area that has been proposed since very early on. Those two add up to our 1-to-1 mitigation.
Jim, you want to say a word about the mitigation, please?
So as we've been in front of the board in the past, we discussed the fact that right now the board was really wanting to see 1-to-1 mitigation, at least within the city. We were able to do that. The Army Corps may or may not accept 1-to-1 mitigation. We're still looking to go out to the other site just within the village as well, or within the city limits as well, up on Van Buren. If we need to do additional at 2-to-1 or whatever the Corps should require. I was hoping to buy wetland credits. However, the credits got used up in the time period while we've been back and forth, so we're going to have to do mitigation somewhere. So that's really it. There's already been preliminary wetland mitigation plans submitted to the board that didn't include the 1-to-1. We'll have to update those. The engineers are working on the final grading plans, and we can update the mitigation plans to go along with those. But that's pretty much where everything stands. We can't go to the Army Corps until there is significantly along with the board, because the Corps won't approve fills on a project that doesn't exist. So until we get close to preliminary site plan approval or conditional, I can't go to the Army Corps.
If there are questions, you can try to answer them.
Let's go to the public first to see if there's anybody here from the public. Please, as you come up, identify yourself, address, and name for the records. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nunzio Giavato, 19 Townsend Street. I was here at the last meeting, and my concern was about the traffic, the impact in our community coming off of Townsend Street. So I went over to Delavan Avenue and pulled out a tape. That street is 38 foot wide with sidewalks. There used to be a traffic light there, and there's a basic 2-lane entry to that neighborhood. Townsend Street is 30 foot wide with no sidewalk. And at the end of the Townsend Street, where the intersection of Townsend and 52 there, right now you can't get out of there sometimes. Can you imagine when you have a new neighborhood coming in there of 13 houses and 37 units? the quality of life of that neighborhood is going to go right down the toilet. My comment, a facetious comment, was we're trying to put a 12 size foot in an 8.5 size shoe, and it's not quite fitting. You know, I'm not trying to stop progress, but the board should really look at how you're going to push the traffic through to that neighborhood. That access street off the new development was meant for emergency purposes. It was never meant for a full-scale access through. And some of the neighbors were kind of, hey, you're not going to start progress, but I guess we could live with that. Now it's changing the whole scheme of things. So take that in consideration, because there's a lot of homes there that strollers and dogs, you know, people walk their infants around there. When you're going to have, you know, 13 houses, the average house could have 2 cars, and 30-something units, which could have up to 2 to 2.5 cars apiece when you do the average. So keep that in mind, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pam Weatherby, 66 Mead Avenue. I strongly urge the planning board to reconsider this project. Having lived in this neighborhood for 30-something years, you know, that property is wetlands. It is protected wetlands. Even if you move it somewhere else, it's wet, and it is going to negatively impact my fellow neighbors, especially when some of them are in the low spot. I don't know if anybody's been over there. You go to the end of Conklin Street, it drops about 20 feet. I know there's a beautiful walkway to Conklin. I don't know how anybody's getting there. It's wetlands, and there's about 20 feet up to get to Conklin Street. I also agree with what Nunzio said with Delavan was built to have a hospital. A hospital was there for numerous years in our past, and Townsend Street, yes, it had a Knights of Columbus, but it was a development, and it still is a development with about 50 houses, which we are going to get 13 additional houses, which they're already working on that project. So I don't even know how this comes into play when a project that was approved for a 13 single-family subdivision on a cul-de-sac is now going to have access, not emergency access, access to 37 townhomes built on land-bound property with protected wetlands. I strongly urge this planning board to not sell this city short. I understand people want to profit, but I feel you're selling everybody short of being able to get this profit, and I strongly urge you to reconsider this. I also have a petition from the neighbors. As a resident of Mead Avenue, Townsend Street, DeSoto Avenue, or Conklin Street, I strongly urge the Beacon Planning Board to reconsider this proposed Beacon Views project on adjacent wetlands property, and for the primary access of this land-bound property to be accessible via Townsend Street. This development will negatively affect our neighborhood and the wildlife with disturbing the wetlands and the additional traffic via the approved Townsend cul-de-sac subdivision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I give this to?
Yeah. Anyone else from the public?
My name is Cheryl Nettleton, and I'm on Mead Avenue.
Please speak into the mic. Just bring the mic down. And could you re-identify yourself again?
Cheryl Nettleton. I'm on Mead Avenue in the area. I agree with Mr. Giovanni. There is not access for 100 or a little less than 100 cars up and down constantly. We have school buses that are having a hard time going through now. This is not going to help matters. But my main question is, and I'm not sure, I've tried looking it up and I'm not getting an answer, Wetland mitigation. I understand that the wetlands were going to be moved from where they are now to Hidden Brook. How do you pick up wetlands and move it with all the wildlife that is there? Can anybody answer that?
Yeah, it's not actually moved, it's just created somewhere else in some ratio. So you're essentially creating or rehabilitating wetlands in another location in order to make up for the wetlands that you're destroying. They're not actually they don't relocate the plants or the animals.
Has anyone looked to see what animals are in there? We have hawks that now have nests in there. We have frogs that the neighbors can hear at night, it's a nice, quiet neighborhood. Now when you're putting in all these new homes, it's going to be posing traffic. Plus, you're not going to have the quiet, I want to say noise, but the frogs, the birds, and all that. You're not going to have that anymore. It's all going to be gone to wherever. And it's like, how do you move wetlands from point A to point B and keeping those animals in that area without really disturbing them? I understand you're saying you're going to move it from here to there, but you're not really moving it. You can't move it.
Well, let's allow the applicant to respond.
Sure.
Was that the only question you had?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, one more from the public and then we can, okay, thank you.
Good evening, Teresa Kraft. I hope you take seriously the impact this project will have on our environment. I still have major concerns regarding the wetlands, included on this undeveloped site, as well as the general section of Beacon, and have many concerns that this large development project will infringe on the quality of life for the existing families who are established in this community. This build will bring in a lot of cars with the potential for fuel and oil runoff, emissions, traffic, and traffic noise. I believe it will have a negative environmental impact on the parcel and surrounding neighborhood infrastructure. Already traffic on Route 52 in this location of Beacon is horrendous. Living in close proximity across the Fishkill Creek, my family and neighbors already hear heavy traffic from 6 a.m. past midnight. I heard the planning board tonight speak of natural environment and the build community. Please do not grant this project a negative declaration. It will have an adverse effect on this site. Moving the mitigation solution to another site sounds like a shifty card game at best. Thank you.
Anybody else in the public?
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Peg O'Leary. I work for Highland Meadows Senior Residence. I'm here this evening to ask the Planning Board to please keep the SEQRA public hearing open and not close it. I'm also here this evening to advise the Planning Board that the stormwater easement is in dispute and is in the middle of litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Okay, I'll allow the applicant to respond.
The mitigation constitutes. So right now, we're going to be doing one-on-one mitigation, which means the exact amount of wetlands that's there now is what's going to be there when the project is completed. So there will be additional mitigation done on another site as well, potentially, for the Army Corps. But basically, just with it, it's just going to be reconfigured on the property. Some area where the road was, there's going to be an area filled, but the wetland will be extended up the hill in one area. Everything's going to be pretty much identical. Whatever wetlands, the amount of wetlands is there, that's what the one-to-one mitigation is on site, which is one of the things that the board was adamant about the last few times that we were here.
Would you, you go ahead first.
Thank you. Could you explain how a wetland, like the limits, like where it ends, is determined?
And would you, in doing so, would you remind the public, please, of the total acreage of the project, the number of acres which are wetlands within the project, and the size of the mitigation area, just to help people get their minds around?
I'll let the engineer discuss that, and then I can. As far as the technical edge, the edge of the wetland is determined by this town, or by this city, and by the Army Corps. There are other ways of doing it, by hydrology, by vegetation, and by soil type, which comes up with as close to a definitive line, moves a little bit here and there, as you can get. DEC, if this was a 12.4 acre wetland or larger, at this point in time, DEC has different parameters, which is solely based on vegetation. Some cities and towns have their own wetland regulations and codes. They come and go, they get sued. It's unfortunate, but right now the standard guidelines is the Army Corps', which is 3 parameters, which is hydrology, vegetation, and soils. And that is how the wetland line was delineated here, and which is what we've been going by. So I'll let the engineer discuss the sizes and all that.
Sure, just as to the scale of these things. The site totals at around 8.6 acres. If memory serves, the wetland is around 2 acres. The disturbance that's being proposed is about 13,000 square feet. So this is about a third of an acre. So it is important for us to note that the disturbance to the wetland is around the periphery. And we can see in this area here, you can see the little symbols, the wetland symbols in that whole portion of the eastern side of the property. That's the wetland. So the development is almost completely on the opposite side of the property, and there is because of the way that the site needs to be configured, there is some coincidental disturbance around the periphery of the wetland, and that is on the scale of the property fairly minimal. As I said, about a third of an acre against a site that's over 8 acres. I did want to just briefly also just touch on the board was asked to look into traffic implications, and as the consultants and as the board is aware, traffic studies have been prepared. All of those implications have been kind of closely studied to this point, starting with when access was coming from another direction, and that's also been that work has also been done with regard to the currently proposed site access. So all of that work has been presented to the board. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
If I may, it's not only the applicant who has submitted traffic reports, but the board's traffic consultant reviewed the applicant's reports and concurred with the applicant's traffic studies. And this primary way of access other than emergency is a way that the board's consultants were hoping we would be able to obtain. So we believe we have, at the cost of losing 3 building sites and at the cost of delays on our side in coming back to you, we believe we have answered appropriately all of the concerns raised by your engineer and your planner. As far as the litigation referred to by Ms. O'Leary, that's a private dispute between neighbors. We've provided your counsel with evidence that there are facially sufficient easements, both now for emergency access and for drainage. And the dispute, again, is a private dispute between 2 neighbors. It's not a land use matter. And so, again, we would hope that unless your consultants have something to add, we would hope they would concur that there are no significant adverse impacts that have been identified, and therefore that you close your public hearing on SEQRA, that you ask your consultants to prepare a determination of significance for the next meeting, and that you also ask to set up and open public hearings on preliminary site plan and preliminary subdivision and site plan.
Well, let's go around. Are you done?
That's it. Thank
Okay.
you.
John?
I had a couple questions.
For me, John, or somebody else?
Uh,
You want somebody who knows what they're talking about, or do you want me?
Probably the engineer. One is that when 25 Townsend, the adjacent 13-lot development was approved, there was an access connection to this property. But it incorporated a traffic circle because we didn't know when this property might be looked at. Is that application, that adjacent property, do you know if they're going to reconsider the traffic circle?
Yeah, we've met with the owner of 25 Townsend, and they're open to making adjustments as needed. Obviously, they have their time schedule for construction and so on, but they've expressed that they're perfectly open to making adjustments that, as required by the city.
Okay. And then the second question I have is that I know that you have a dispute with the neighbors to the south. You have proposed significant mitigation, stormwater, landscaping, sidewalk on that southerly property. How are we to be assured that that will ever get done if we don't know how this litigation may end?
Again, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Cantor.
You've proposed as part of your site plan, stormwater on the adjacent easement property to the south, but also landscaping and sidewalk extension on the neighbor's property itself, beyond the easement.
We plan to proceed and do it. If some judge says we can't do it, then we're going to have to come back to you because we're not going to be able to do that which you approved. But we're asking you to approve it on the land use end. And again, we believe that we have those rights. If it turns out that in the private litigation we don't, we'll be here with our tail between our legs telling you we couldn't do what we told you we were going to do and coming up with something else.
Yeah, and I'll just say I concur with Mr. Cantor's comments. Ultimately, before permits are issued, they will have to demonstrate that they do have the valid easement, that we all believe that they do. But if a judge determines otherwise, then the risk is really on the applicant's side, because the applicant will have to come back for amended approvals from the board.
Do we have any idea of what the something else could be, though? What would be the the alternate plan? And should we know, or at least have some idea? Because the only thing that concerns me about that description is that we then end up in a situation where you have a limited number of choices, perhaps, and they're not really desirable. And then we have an applicant saying, "I'm hamstrung here. Are you going to? What are you going to do to me?"
Yeah, I think that again, it would be up to the applicant to come back with a plan that works within the confines of the reality at that time. If and when a judge determines that they don't have the easement access that they believe that they have and that we believe they have, we could be it's hard. I don't think we can speculate right now what that plan might be. I think it could be something completely different than what we're looking at now. But I think that that's a bridge that we need to cross if and when we get there. I don't think it's a useful exercise to go through.
I'm often called upon to develop contingencies in my job, and so then I have to say, okay, well, all other things being equal, if I could not do this one thing, what's the solution? So, I don't think that's completely unorthodox to ask that question. And I get a little bit concerned about, like I said, being that there ends up being pressure on the board to approve a Band-Aid, because it's...
The board doesn't like pressure, and we don't do things based on pressure. So let's make sure that's very clear. But I understand what you're saying, Lynn. But if we could, I want to make sure John can please, and we'll go around the board, the comments for a second. John, you continue.
I'm done.
You're done? Mr. Russo?
So the biggest ones of concern were the access and the wetlands based upon previous conversations with the board. They do have some outstanding comments that I have. They've provided some responses to them, but until we see revised plans, I can't say whether they were completed or not. With the revisions to the plans, they will need to revise their SWIP also. That will have to be updated to reflect the recent revisions to this plan.
Right, that's understood, and we have a handful of engineering-related comments to respond to that are all well within our ability to take care of now that we have a clear direction. As Mr. Cantor said, we walked through this concept with consultants a couple of months ago, and of course we're here tonight to confirm that this is a favorable direction that the board would like to see the site plan go in, and that being the case, assuming that that's the case, we will then roll these changes into our full site plan set and address any outstanding comments.
So John, just for clarity, just repeat I want to make sure I'm clear on what's missing.
So basically, there's been revisions to the plans, and that is going to be, the full set is going to have to be revised. The utilities will need to be revised in this one area that they've performed the wetland mitigation or proposing the wetland mitigation. The stormwater pollution prevention plan for the project is going to have to be revised. Probably less of an impact now since they're reducing the amount of impervious, but they did have some stormwater, ways of handling stormwater over in that area. So we still have to take a look at what they're going to be doing with the stormwater on site. So there may have to be some revisions with regards to stormwater also. Okay. And then we had some previous outstanding comments that they provided responses to, but until we see the plans, I can't confirm that they've been completed.
Okay.
Respectfully, I don't think that any of the questions raised to the level of SEQRA questions. They're work chores that have to be completed before we have your approval. But on the SEQRA end, I think we've established through all of the wetland studies, all of the traffic studies, that there are no significant adverse impacts, and therefore I again ask that you consider closing the SEQRA hearing, that you ask your consultants to prepare a determination of significance, and that you ask your staff to schedule the beginning of public hearings on preliminary subdivision and site plan.
So let's go around the board. Karen, you
I'm interested to know, there seems to be often a tension between the real world experience of traffic and the world of traffic studies. And I'm wondering if there's any mechanism in place that the city can use to extract improvements for, sidewalks, stoplights, to address the traffic impacts.
So if an impact is identified as a direct result of an application, then the applicant is responsible for mitigating that impact through things like traffic lights, signage, striping options. Here, and we do have the city's traffic consultant here at the meeting tonight who can speak to the review that they did of the traffic impact study that was submitted. Here, if my memory serves me correctly, I don't think any of those mitigation elements were required here because there were no impacts to be mitigated based on the traffic studies. But your comment about sort of the real world, everyday experience on the streets versus what's shown in traffic impact studies is one that I hear almost every night. It's a very common concern amongst planning boards and amongst the community. So it's not unusual.
Since our traffic consultant is here, could you just step and speak to, and the board, bear with me, we'll come back.
No, that sounds good. Because the intersection of Townsend and 52 is somewhat busy. You have the laundromat, the Dunkin' Donuts is currently closed, but that was a pretty busy terminal because of there were some business uses that were highly utilized. One of them's not now, but.
Sorry again for my tardiness. I want to start there.
No,
regarding the traffic study.
Just identify yourself to the public.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Star Kip with Creighton Manning Engineering. We're the city's traffic consultant, licensed engineer in New York. The applicant did provide a traffic study in May of 2020 that was prepared by then Mazer, now Colliers. That traffic study looked at a development that had 40 units at the time. Now that has been reduced to 37. The review of that traffic study at the time had found no major impacts. I was unable to pull up the old study, but we had gone through 3 comment letters prior to this review letter that has been submitted for the planning board for this meeting. And there was no outstanding comments at the end of that 3rd letter. And this 4th review letter is kind of acknowledging their reduction in size of the development when it comes to generators or traffic generators on site, going from 40 units to 37 units.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
Could you explain what a significant impact would, what would rise to be a significant impact? It seems to me that if you're doubling, the houses in a community, just from a layperson's vision, that seems to be like a significant impact.
So the traffic studies that are completed, the study that was completed by Mazer was, it looked at intersection operations. So they're going to look at delay that occurs at intersections. While the development may double the size, and I don't know if that's truly what's happening, but the site is not going to generate a 1-to-1 ratio of trips. So because there's 37 units, it doesn't mean that there's 37 outbound trips occurring in the morning. So they're kind of looking at how that site occurs at peak hours. But as I could say, the impact study that they conducted looked at levels of service at intersections. And since I don't have that in front of me right now, I can't speak too much to what other items they looked at.
I think also something just to kind of tack on to what Stark was saying. I think, it depends on the distribution of the traffic, right? At peak times versus non-peak times. It depends on which intersection you're looking at. But I think also for SEQRA purposes, when you're talking about a significant adverse environmental impact, one of the thresholds that SEQRA sets forth, just sort of generically, is I believe it's 100 new trips, 100 vehicle trips, as potentially being a significant adverse environmental impact.
That's a state threshold.
Right.
There's also like an industry standard threshold that the state drew that from, which is 100 site-generated trips. That being said, if a site's generating 80 trips, you might want to look at it, but 100 trips is that threshold for a project.
So one more, sorry.
Yeah, sure, no.
Since the traffic study was done in May 2020, which we were pretty much locked down then, there were a lot of traffic studies that were done in this period of time where traffic was greatly reduced. So is that taken into consideration?
That might just be a little bit of miscommunication there. That the last review was conducted in May of 2020. The study that they prepared, I believe, drew on 2018 or 2019 volumes. So that would have been outside of that kind of pandemic impact.
Right. The traffic impact study was initially submitted in September, actually August 2019. So yeah, it would have been based on pre-pandemic traffic counts.
Thank you.
And so given that some of the different things that we've been in flux on with this project, whether the Leonard Street development was happening, or Townsend Street development was happening, whether there would be access through Hastings or not, we've gone back and just double-checked that the reports reflect, the development as it's going to occur right now, as the new developer that's purchased the Townsend property, we've got the right number of lots and homes and stuff?
So what we looked at, rather than go back into the study and check it, what we did was we looked at the trip generation of the site, because that would lead to changes in the impact from a traffic standpoint. And because there was a reduction in trips, and we also based it on the most recent publication by the IT, which is the industry standard for trip generation, there was a reduction in trips generated by the site. So based on the fact that there was no outstanding comments and that there was actually a reduction in trips now generated by the site with this new concept, we felt that there was no other comments to have.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions specific to traffic for our? Thank you.
Yep.
Kevin?
I'm still a little unsure. It's unclear to me what the role of the Corps of Engineers is and what the responsibilities of the property owner are when that process starts, and what their ability to influence the development is.
So the Army Corps of Engineers is basically all waters in the United States is regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers and everything. So they have the ultimate responsibility of issuing permits and things like that. This would fall under Nationwide 29 permit, which is up to a ½ acre of fill in waters of the United States with mitigation. And the Army Corps, once we do all the submittals, decides on the exact amount of mitigation. We can give our recommendations. It starts at 1-to-1 and goes up. As far as them looking at the site plan and saying, sorry, we don't like that, they don't do that. First we have to show that we avoided it, which changing and going out through towns and reduced impacts instead of going out to Conklin. We can show that. And minimization, if you're trying, instead of blowing through it and doing all kinds of other things, you show minimization and then the mitigation. That's how it goes with the Army Corps of Engineers. And it's a process. But they don't issue a fill permit until they know that we have at least preliminary or conditional site plan approval, because they're not going to go through all the issuances that they have to do for something that's not going to happen. You know, we kind of say it's the chicken and the egg, because some boards want to see, well, I want to see your wetland permit. I can't get a wetland permit without, that sort of which is why most boards make it a conditional, is one of the conditions before you can actually pull the hardcore building permit. Does that answer?
Kevin?
I think I understand. I just wasn't sure, how much influence, you answered the question.
Okay.
They had on the site plan.
Lane?
Thanks. And I'm sorry if I don't recollect all this, but did we at one point have a request to hire a wetland scientist to advise the board on the mitigation effort?
We did. We had discussed that previously.
Did we get that
So
determination?
we had reached out to at least one wetland consultant who was not able to be retained.
Okay.
If the board is still interested in retaining someone, given the revisions in the plan that you see now with the reduction in units and the 1-to-1 mitigation on site that's been achieved, we can certainly reinvigorate those efforts. But to date, someone has not been retained.
Okay, because what I recall was the driving, or was the impetus behind that, was the question of off-site mitigation.
Correct.
And
Yes.
so, can we, if the Army Corps were to come in and say, we want more than a 1-to-1 mitigation, that would be the point at which the applicant would have to go to the off-site location to make up the difference. So we would be, if that occurs, we would be back to that same impetus that was driving us to request a wetland scientist.
Your approval would not be based on that. You would, by saying that by approving this plan, you're saying that you are comfortable with the 1-to-1 mitigation, that you're concerns about the wetland disturbance that we heard about earlier, the 13,000 square feet of wetland disturbance of the 2 acres is properly mitigated by what you're seeing right here on site. That off-site, if I understand the applicant's proposal correctly, the off-site mitigation will come into play only if the Army Corps requires it.
More than a one-to-one mitigation.
Yeah, and that'll be something that's sort of separate and apart from this site plan.
Okay, thank you. So the second question is, given that we haven't retained a wetland scientist, who, of our consultants, who's reviewed the measures that are proposed to protect the existing wetland during construction? So right now we have about a 2-acre wetland out of an 8-acre site, of which about a third of an acre is going to be disturbed and require a one-to-one mitigation. And
So basically, Len, they've come in with this plan to show us what they're proposing to do, to get the board's input.
Right.
So now they have to go back and revise the plans, which would incorporate those protections. So at this point, nobody's reviewed it because the plans haven't been developed.
But they did do a wetland report.
Right.
Which I reviewed, I'm sure John read as well. We're no wetlands experts, but there were no red flags in it, and you rely on the Army Corps to protect the interest of the wetlands. They are supposedly the experts on these things. If they're going to do anything other than edge mitigation on another site, you'd want to have somebody to monitor that in construction and that sort of thing.
Yep, so back in June, for the June 2020 meeting, they did submit a wetland evaluation report that at that time was prepared by their previous wetland consultant, Ecological Solutions, Mike Nowicki. They also submitted a wetland mitigation overview report more recently in January of 2021, again by Ecological Solutions. So there have been, over the years when this application has been reviewed, there have been a number of reports submitted about the wetlands.
May I ask a follow-up on this topic?
Sure.
If the Army Corps requires additional mitigation, what's the procedure for our involvement at that for the excess mitigation?
At that time, I believe the only involvement you would have is if on the off-site location, if it triggered any kind of permits or approvals from your board. So for example, if it triggered site plan approval, wetland permit approval from your board.
Yeah, so we might have
then they would come before you.
I was going to say, so then at that point, I don't know what the mechanism to compel compliance is if there was a discussion, but it would be out of our hands at that point.
So can we make additional mitigation part of our approval so that we have input on where it's done?
So I don't know how much input you would have into the Army Corps process. So if, say, for example, the Army Corps said the site that they selected is not sufficient for the Army Corps purposes, but you find it sufficient, I don't know how much. I haven't seen local planning boards have interplay with Army Corps on that level. Not to say that it can't happen, but I haven't seen that.
Have a lot more professional support to that going against the Army Corps.
Right,
The
but
other
can
thing
we
too-
request, does the board have the ability to say, we want more than one-to-one mitigation?
On-site?
No, not on-site. Like, they're fulfilling one-to-one on-site, but say we want 2-to-1.
Yep.
Can we require that?
I believe that, yes, yeah. If you feel that this is not sufficient to adequately address the wetland mitigations on site, the wetland disturbances on site, and you believe that more than 1-to-1 is necessary, and you would be interested in seeing the 2-to-1, for example, by utilizing that off-site location, I think you would be, within your rights to request or require that. I think the other thing I wanted to mention too is a building permit would not be issued until the applicant demonstrated that they have the Army Corps permit in hand. So, there would certainly be no disturbances on site until that Army Corps process is complete.
Do we know, just
Okay, you're up.
do we know, would the Army Corps ever require more than one-to-one on-site, one-to-one mitigation on-site?
I would have to rely on the wetlands, I would ask the applicant's wetlands expert to
'Cause it sounded like you were saying.
to address that question.
The Army Corps actually does not require mitigation to be done on the physical property. They're truthfully, if this region had what they call in lieu of fees, which is wetland mitigation banks, that is their first line. Then it's second to be within the watershed. So we're in what they call the lower to middle Hudson. So it's anywhere within the middle Hudson.
I see.
So it's not even town specific, it's watershed specific.
So if they were to require more than the one-to-one.
I have to have it on the Hudson River, I have to have it near the Hudson River somewhere.
Somewhere.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to even be in
But
Beacon.
the board has already requested that we have it within the city, which is why we were working with the Van Burens to have it, though on the edge of the city, it is the best site that we were able to locate.
But that's no longer available.
No, it is available.
Oh, the Van Buren is, but the.
Yes, that is, if the Army Corps requires more than one-to-one,
Okay.
that is our next step. They're in contract, I believe, with that.
Or if your board requires more than.
Hi, this is Greg Kamodolsky, the applicant. Yes, if we need more than one-to-one, that property is available to us to mitigate beyond the one-to-one. The other point is, whatever mitigation plan we come up with has to be approved by the Army Corps. That's number one. Number two is the Army Corps requires that we perform an annual inspection of the mitigation once a year by our licensed and professional wetland specialist for a 5-year period, once a year for 5 years after the mitigation has been put in place to make sure that everything is working properly. So that's another safeguard by the Corps of Engineers.
Jennifer, what would be, the only question I have about what you said before is, what would be our decision criteria for asking for more than one-to-one mitigation? And I would think that we would have to have a wetland scientist to advise us to say, something like, and this is completely hypothetical, someone to say like, the wetlands that are being disturbed on the site are very high-value habitat, and because of that, because of mitigation can never bring it back to what it was, that's why you'd be within your rights to ask for, greater than one-to-one, on the off-site, because you're losing, more than you're, without that kind of advice, how would we?
You would have to have a basis and a reasonable basis in the record to make that request. Whether you need an expert to make that request, I don't think that that's absolutely necessary. I think you can look at the information that's before you, that's been presented by the applicant. You could even ask the applicant tonight whether they have any objection to you requiring that. If the applicant is willing to offer that, then I think it's kind of a moot point. It can become part of the application.
Just add to that. It's been my experience, not that it necessarily has to be done here, but it's my experience that most town boards, most planning boards sort of defer to the Corps of Engineers when it's a Corps of Engineer wetland and there's mitigation, as they're the governing body and they're the experts and they make the determination as to what's needed and how much is needed. And again, it's just my experience that most planning boards follow the Corps lead. I'm not saying it has to be here, but that's what I'm used to.
So you know what might be appropriate in light of some of the comments from the public would be to ask your wetland scientists just to describe for us their characterization of the site. We heard some public comments saying that there's a diversity of wildlife, that they have raptors or hawks utilizing the site. Is that in line with what the report and the characterization of the wetland has been? And therefore, maybe you'd want to talk about how the project would protect the habitat such that it would be, the expectation would be that would continue after the development, that the same species would be utilizing the site, and that the benefits to the community, as they perceive them, would still be there.
Well, we could have Mr. Bates come up right.
Here's the situation, is the frogs and things like that are gonna stay.
Yeah.
I don't know if the hawk's gonna stay.
No, of course
Because
not.
It's an upland species, and
I'm not asking for a guarantee, I'm just asking for,
so
characterization.
You're changing the habitat. As soon as you go in there and you clear for the trees in the upland area, whether that wetland wasn't there or not, you would be changing the habitat. And there are no protected upland species other than the northern long-eared bat, and I have to check for the Indiana bat. But other than the bats, there are no protected species in the upland areas. So by cutting those trees, you're already changing that. As far as the frogs and amphibians, the habitat's going to stay roughly the same. In fact, it's probably going to get a little bit wetter because the stormwater and things will be going that way. So it'll provide more things for frogs and salamanders and things like that. But there's going to be a definite change in the habitat. There's just no way around it.
Can you comment on, in your opinion, what the quality of the wetland?
Well, the wetland itself, the wetland itself, unfortunately, because of Conklin and the other houses there, there's garbage. It's an urban wetland. It's which was one of the reasons why when we had the preliminary discussions, the hardest thing is going to be to keep the invasive species out of here as we're doing it, which is what requires the 5-year plan. Up in Van Buren, it's a pristine area. So that area is going to be far easier for us to increase better habitat and things like that and have less invasive species come in. So there's going to be a dichotomy going on.
And so that's something that the community has to recognize, is that if there is off-site mitigation, there's an expectation that even though it's not in the same place, it would be a greater benefit because that habitat is probably a higher quality already, and enhancing it is going to...
In this case, yes.
Yeah.
Not in all cases.
No, but in this case.
But
yeah,
in this case,
specifically
yes.
in this case.
Because it's literally at the end of the road, there's nothing up there. So, and it's tying into a nice watershed system, and it's got, spring water coming down off the hill into it. It's a really nice area. And there's no disturbance, and there's no planning on disturbance by that family up there.
And there's lots of
it'll be
wildlife
protected.
up in that area.
And there's a lot of wildlife up in that area.
And so we don't have a planting plan yet for the mitigation areas. We just have a, or do we? Or do we just have
some concepts.
Yeah.
We never went down the full mitigation thing because until the board said yes, thus move forward. I spoke with Mr. Russo, and we both agreed that until the board said this is preliminary, the way we're going, it didn't make sense to keep doing drawing after drawing.
So J.C., you have any?
No, I just, overall, I would express appreciation for the decrease in the number of units from 40 to 37. I think it's a positive step, but I don't have anything.
Okay. Anybody else on the board, from the public, have something to say? So right now, I think what we're faced with are two options. Option one, leave the SEQRA public hearing open until such time as John Russo has everything with respect to what they're presenting. And then we have those plans in front of us to review. Option one. And inside of option one is also to make a recommendation to draft, help me, Jan.
A SEQRA negative declaration.
Yeah, just to make SEQRA negative deck.
Yeah. And you can do both things. You can keep the public hearing open and also direct my office to prepare draft SEQRA documents for you to review at your next meeting. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you have to act on them, but you have the drafts in front of you. Mm-hmm. And if the applicant's materials that they're going to submit in the way of the revised plans and the mitigation planting plans and all of the things that we talked about tonight are satisfactory to you, then you have that draft that you can move forward with. If not, you don't have to act on it.
Right. That's option one. Option two, close the public hearing. Still recommend the draft be done, so we have it. Those are the two options that I see we're faced with right now. And I'm going to just go around the board and get your thoughts.
I vote for option one.
Okay, Kevin?
Option one.
Lynn?
Option one is to keep the hearing open?
Yep.
Sure, option one.
Yeah.
Option one.
J.C.?
Yeah, I agree, option one.
Motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So, and then just, since this may come up again, I guess the board should be considering that question of whether it would like to have input into the mitigation ratio itself, and whether, people on the board want to consider the changes to, as the applicant's scientist, biologist pointed out, removing the trees, changing the upland habitat to create the development, is going to change some of the interplay that the community has noticed between the upland habitat and the wetlands. And maybe there is a reason there to request a higher ratio of mitigation. And if that's a question that we want to take on as a board, people should think about it and how they would justify it or act on it, and what would be an appropriate ask if we collectively choose we want to pursue that.
Just, and I know this project has dragged on for a long time, and it's hard to remember previous. The applicant at previous meetings, and I can't cite the date, offered to do 2-to-1 mitigation on a higher quality wetland at the edge of the city. And the board asked them to consider a 1-to-1 on the site. And I think it was implicated in that the Army Corps would make the decision about ultimate ratios.
Yeah,
But when we asked for the wetland scientist to be retained by the board, had we really closed that issue out?
Well, because we were anticipating this off-site, which we could hardly have any involvement in because it wasn't even on this site. So that's why I thought, why the board asked for the potential extra consultant. So we asked them for 1-to-1 on the site. They've done that, and it seems to me, going back on previous statements, and you have every right to do that if you want to, but that's how I remember it, at least, is that we've asked for 1-for-1, they've done it on the site.
So your recollection is that previous decision was we'd prefer to have mitigation on site, and that's what led the applicant to remove the 3 units.
Mhm.
And so there's already been
that train's
quid
kind of
pro
left.
quo.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just have a procedural question on this. If we, as a board, decide we'll take the 1-to-1 on the site as our preferred resolution, and the Army Corps asks for additional mitigation off-site,
Which is out of our hands.
is there a mechanism for us? I know they've agreed to do it within the city limits. Is there a way to codify that in our approval?
I think there is, and I think that kind of segues into the comment that I wanted to make, which was, my understanding is your decision it's not a decision between 1-to-1 or the 2-to-1 with offsite. You can require them to have the 2-to-1 offsite incorporated as part of your approval. So, I don't want you to think it's like a mutually exclusive option, if that makes sense.
And so that's a good issue for the community to consider, is that you can't always get the benefit in the exact disturbed area, but collectively we would still benefit as a community from having additional, mitigation, rehabilitation of wetlands or enhancement of wetlands somewhere else within our city limits.
Right.
That we're still going to collectively be able to enjoy if we, can. So.
Right.
Sorry.
I apologize, my hearing isn't very good, but if I heard that the consensus was what you called option 1, which was keeping the SEQRA hearing open and also asking council to prepare a determination of significance, could we also get option 1A, which is to also schedule and open a public hearing on preliminary subdivision and on site plan?
Attending scene.
Saves a month's time.
Yeah, it's up to the board. I mean, ultimately, if you don't complete SEQRA, I would not recommend that you open the public hearing, so it would have to be renoticed, so it's an additional cost to the applicant. So if the applicant wants to take on that cost of, and burden of potentially having to renotice for July,
Go around the
then
board, how do you feel?
It's up to the board.
I mean, it seems reasonable to me to open up the public hearing.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's, we've spent a lot of time on this, a lot. And
So I'm going to pause you. Just yes, no?
Yes.
Okay. Lynn?
Yes.
Jill?
Question is, are we voting to
Just
open?
To schedule it.
Just to schedule the public hearing, just that one.
And does that have anything to do with the neg deck?
We will draft the neg deck for next month. Public hearing for SEQRA stays open. If we're not happy with any of those pieces, public hearing doesn't happen.
Oh, okay, well then I think we should schedule the public hearing.
J.C.?
For a subdivision, I agree.
Motion?
Motion.
Seconded.
Okay. Lynn, second. Karen first. All in favor?
Aye.
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 A is
very
added.
much.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
You too.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, sure. Just take a 5-minute break, please. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 2. Public hearing for SEQRA review on application for site plan approval and subdivision, lot merger, approval, multifamily residential 62 units, 16 West Main Street, submitted by Farrell Building Company.
So since this is a public hearing, we should have a motion to open the public hearing.
Let me
for
have
that.
a motion to open the public hearing, please.
Motion?
Second?
Seconded.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi. Good evening. Steve Spino with JMC. We're the site civil engineer. Here with Aryeh Siegel. He's the architect, as well as with Farrell Building Company. And we're here to, our goal tonight is, to give an overview presentation to the public and a refresher for the board, and hopefully answer everybody's questions, and hopefully move towards a SEQRA determination eventually. We've been before this board for a little while now, so the project is, we do need to get to the city council for a special permit, and we think we've come a long way in addressing some comments and concerns of the board over the time that we've been here, and we think right now we're kind of down to a few, detailed comments, sort of construction comments that do need to be addressed. But we think we're close. So the first image we have up is just an overall aerial view of the neighborhood there. In the center of the image there is the Ferrara's Auto Body, which is the subject property right there on the corner of West Main and Bank Street. To the right or to the east, you have the hardware store. You have the local brewery there, kind of a little commercial space as well. And then you have surrounding residential homes throughout the neighborhood up Bank Street. You have River Street, and then you have the Metro North train station on the left side with some commercial and industrial uses down by the train station there. So just a little bit of an overview, and then the next slide will zoom in a little closer, and we've overlaid the proposed development onto the slide there. So it's a 1.5 acre property, and it's currently developed, and it's got 3 lots right now, and we're proposing to consolidate it to 1 lot. And there's pretty much most of the property we're proposing to disturb and redevelop. It's a lot of it is already developed. We're adding a little bit of new development, impervious area. you know, it's in two different zoning districts. The front lot is the linkage district, and then there's a small kind of appendage lot off to the northeast behind the adjacent commercial property, which is in a residential area, and that's the one we're looking to propose some parking in, and then we need the special permit for that. Firstly, the project would propose to remove the existing building, the parking area in front and behind the building. Right now, there's a few curb cuts on West Main Street, to driveway, and then there's a driveway on Bank Street adjacent to the corner of West Main. And there's a driveway up Bank Street sort of towards the north end of the property. And so the building is situated kind of on the right there, and you have a parking area in front on its left side and in the rear. So, you know, there's parking out there, there's stored vehicles, there's some materials from the commercial use that's there right now. And, you know, what we're proposing is to remove all of that, and there's a you know, a multi-story, a residential property, project, 62 units with parking associated with that. It would meet the code in terms of quantity and location. It's behind the buildings. So in that image there, you see sort of an L-shaped new building. There's a west appendage and an east appendage. So the access off of West Main Street would be one driveway that's sort of shifted a little bit to the west from the current curb cut off West Main Street, and you would drive underneath the building or through the first floor where, you know, it would be open for vehicles to pass through and get to the parking in the rear. And then as you head up Bank Street, there's units along the side of the road there, and there's a driveway in the upper corner there on part of the property where is currently a driveway now, and we would widen it and improve it a little bit in terms of its safety and access. And then you would come back down into the property from the back as well. You could enter there and go park. And then you could see in the upper right corner there's the proposed parking in that sort of appendage lot in the back, again, where we would need that special permit from the city council. We've looked at emergency access, delivery access, in multiple ways, getting into and out of the site, routing through the site. There is clearance under the building where it drives straight through there off of West Main Street. I think it's about 13 feet clear, which is adequate for the largest fire truck and typical delivery trucks. There's a lot of improvements to be made along the frontage. New sidewalk, curbing, streetscape, landscape, you know, as you're along West Main Street and along Bank Street. The sidewalk that's there now, you know, is a little deteriorated over the years, and as part of the project, this would all be replaced. So I think aesthetically, there's a lot of improvements, you know, from the frontage, you know, looking at the property. And I think it's just important to note too that it's, you know, currently it's a commercial use, and, you know, we're proposing a residential use, so it's, we think, kind of more, you know, maybe more in character with the neighborhood. And you know, it's a really beautiful building that REA has designed. You know, a few other things are, you know, we think that there's significant drainage improvements. Currently the site has no stormwater quantity or quality, you know, or very little, and we're proposing quite a bit more, you know, newer green practices, things like that. There's improvements, you know, in access. There's, we think the driveway to the north there, currently you can exit out of it, which is an unsafe condition due to sight distance. So, you know, we looked at that, and it would be an entering driveway only. So there's some improvements that we've sort of worked with the board and its consultants along the way, you know, to kind of address some of the existing issues that there may be on the site. So I think at this point, you know, maybe REA would like to present a portion of the building to the public here, and you could get a feel for what we're proposing, and then we'll answer any questions.
So we don't have a lot of significant changes since you saw it last month when we came back to look at this. We've been working with the ARB subcommittee and going back and forth with them. So there's a few more changes that we discussed last week at that meeting, and then I'll be bringing that back to them, and then we'll bring the design back to the full board after that. So, but basically it's a brick building. There's some hardy board features on it, but mainly brick. And like I said, we've gone back and forth with the ARB subcommittee to refine the design and look at window proportions and materials, and how to split up the facade and get piers on the building. So we've done a lot of work with them. But that's basically where we are there, and we'll be back with that.
Anyone here from the public on this? Okay. Oh, yep.
It's short. I believe this development plan as designed and redesigned is still too big for this parcel's small footprint, and the location of another towering building will take away from the beauty of Beacon and the views heading west towards the river. Adding congestion of 62 or more cars is infeasible. Yes, we want Beacon to be a walkable city, but reality tells us something different. Families have cars, some have two. Please do not grant this project a neg deck. It will have an environmental impact on all.
Hello, my name is Julia Cohen. I live at 30 Bank Street. I've only been here in Beacon a year. My daughters and I moved up from Brooklyn, not because of the pandemic, but we were victims of domestic violence, and we were looking for a nice, safe, quiet place to live. And now this. So, I mean, obviously it's not all about me, but I have some major concerns about the project. One is that a lot of us that live in proximity to the project are going to lose our river view, which is one of the reasons I bought my house. And the second reason is that there's a lot of people on Tompkins, that live at Tompkins Terrace, that don't have cars. They walk, down into town. They come back from school. The kids come back from school. And I imagine if the, access is on Bank Street, that a lot of the cars, if they're going like the other way toward Wappinger, are going to go up Bank Street and turn right on Tompkins. And already you really have to be careful of the kids walking, and you have to be careful of a lot of the pedestrians, because there's just a lot of people without cars over there. So that's my other concern. And then I also wondered, I don't know if what the laws are in Beacon, but if there's going to be some affordable housing units as part of the project. Those are my comments and questions so far. But I think it looks like it's going to be several stories tall. And I know I'm sorry, but the developers are kind of painting a picture that, Ferrera's was like or Mr. Ferrari. I know I go to him, actually, he's my mechanic, but, that it's kind of run down, which it is. The property's kind of run down, but it's quiet, and it's very quiet, and he's been there a really long time. It's just like it's just a very quiet block, and this is going to change things totally. I think it's going to make a big impact on, the streets that are next to it, like High Street and Bank Street. So, thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to our professionals, John.
The main items that are left.
We'll come back to you. One second.
Sorry.
We'll come back to you. Just
Go
wait.
ahead.
We'll come back to you. Go ahead, Joe. Go.
Okay. Main items that are left are lighting specifications and roof plan, which we've asked for. The only new information we have, other than the information we got at the Architectural Review Subcommittee, is the site distance analysis, which I think John will talk about, but it does lose far fewer on-street parking spaces based on the new analysis, which is helpful. So, other than that, I think it's the main issues left are architectural. I will remind everybody, this is in the linkage district. This is meets all the codes other than that rear parking lot. It meets the parking requirement. And there used to be a 3-story factory on that corner. So in many ways, it's sort of bringing back a previous corner building similar to what used to be there. And the Architectural Review Subcommittee has sort of kept that in mind when they're looking at the architecture.
Public, John Russo, if you could pause 1 second.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Come on.
My name is Juliette Harvey. I'm a Beacon resident and a Beacon business owner. I as well feel like this project is too big for the property. My business is Beacon Pilates, which is right next to it on 16 West Main Street. I've been in business for 16 years. And I think maybe if you're saying that there used to be a 3-story building, I don't know how many years ago that was, but 3 stories is quite different from 4 stories, and this has always been a debate that has happened for a long time in Beacon on Main Street as well, and I think it is of concern at this current development. I own a Pilates studio, and as you can imagine, owning a gym over the last 2 years has been extremely challenging. And after not being sure if my business was going to pull through, I am seeing some stability now, and the noise pollution and the dust coming from this project will put my business in jeopardy for sure. My clients spend a lot of good money to come in and take class at my studio, and they're not going to want to sit in a space with construction noise. My window is right there. I also, with my COVID protocols, have to keep my door open and my windows open, and that is not going to be possible with this construction. And another concern I have is that right now there's a lot of trees between the 2 properties that I look at, and I don't know if all of those are going to be knocked down and what could be mitigated with the trees there. Thank you.
Thank you. John Clark, I have a question. For the purpose of people who are coming to Beacon, who need to understand what could be developed in specific zones, what would you recommend that they review, or what could they do? Because quite often, I appreciate what's being said, but to understand the limitation of this board, there must be a way for them to really get a better picture of where they're buying a piece of property and what can happen next door. What would you recommend?
Well, you could start with the comprehensive plan, which is where these sort of basic ideas were formulated, why there was a linkage district, what was the intent of it. The idea was to create residential development between the train station and Main Street so that people would be able to walk to either the riverfront or to the businesses on Main Street. So that whole hillside, which had been demolished in the urban renewal period in the 70s and 80s, had primarily stood vacant for 40 years, undeveloped. It was leveled for new development, and then the new development never happened in that area, the linkage district. So the purpose of the linkage district was to repopulate that area with buildings that were consistent with the historic building types in Beacon. I know zoning is hard to understand for people who don't deal with it every day, but there is a section in the code called the linkage district that has illustrations in it of approved building types. So it's not just dense language. You can go to the linkage district. It gives you dimensions, and there is a requirement for affordable housing on 10% of the total units. So 6 units would be designated for below market rate housing. So that's the best I can offer, is that you go to the zoning code, that linkage district that has some descriptive elements, design standards, illustrations of what the buildings should or might look like, to to be consistent with the design standards. And so there is visuals in there that you can look at.
Appreciate it. Thank you. John Russo.
All right. So they did provide a limited one.
You'll be next.
They did provide a limited submittal, more or less. They were looking at site distance, and Mr. Clark spoke to try and reduce the amount of parking that was being eliminated along West Main. So with that, all of our previous comments of our April 8th correspondence are still outstanding at this time. But with regards to this submission, what they did is they adjusted the view or the location of the driver exiting the West Main access to bring him further out, because basically they had him stopped all the way behind the sidewalk, all the way further back from the cars that were parallel parked along the road. So basically they brought him up to the point of an actual intersection at this point to improve the sight distance and what it truly would happen. And with that, they were able to reduce the number of parking stalls that had to be reduced on the neighboring property, in front of the neighboring property. But with that, I would turn it over to Stark, who probably has explored this even further.
So just segueing from the sight distance question, yes, what they did was they adjusted the location of the driver's eye to enhance sight distance, which is a common practice in urban environments. What'll happen is the driver will stop, they'll see there's nobody on the sidewalk, they'll move forward, and that will allow them to kind of optimize their sight lines. So the other traffic comments that we had a letter that was circulated back in October 2020. While some of the comments are more like acknowledgement comments about their report and about their site plan, there were some that were outstanding. I think the applicant's engineer touched on them. One was about larger vehicles circulating the site, specifically garbage trucks and fire trucks. We had a little concern about the height, that clearance height for the skyway or walkway at the entrance. We also noted in that previous letter possible study of the Tompkins Avenue, Ralph Street intersection at 9D, which is where one of the members of the public kind of noted that drivers may not go to Beekman Street to go, up to the bridge. They might take a right and then take a right onto Tompkins up to 9D. And that's an analysis of the traffic features there, not a impact analysis, but the conditions of the stop signs, of the striping, of the intersection itself, to see if there's anything that can be done to enhance safety at that intersection, because it is an unsignalized intersection. And the impact study that was prepared did note that it's operating a level of service F, which is the worst one, or the worst degree. However, that was due to projects out beyond this development. So just the traffic on 9D in itself is bad enough that there's poor operations at that intersection. And so this project would just continue to exacerbate those issues. That was all we had.
So just to make sure that I'm clear on that, because I'm just thinking that if I was exiting this development during morning rush hour, coming out of because you're going to exit onto West Main, right? Because the other driveway is in only, right off of, so, and if you're looking at a line of cars coming to the train station that you'd have to turn across if you wanted to make a left and get to 9D that way, you might find it easier to make a right and then make a right again on Bank and seek that other route to 9D, right?
Correct.
Rather than having to turn across 2 lanes of traffic, you just have to deal with one.
Correct.
And so you're saying that'll it'll exacerbate an already poor intersection onto 9D.
Right. Well, yes, it'll exacerbate that from a traffic impact standpoint, but also just for safety standpoints. It's an unsignalized intersection, so there's no, protected pedestrian crossing there. We just wanted to see if the applicant could look at that intersection.
Yeah, because then you have pedestrians probably using that path to get to the train station, right? So you're saying there's no walk,
Yeah,
people walking down
pedestrians
that.
could use that, yes. To if they were coming from further north, they could walk down that direction to get to the train station, yes.
There was a report from, or I'm reporting, from the Traffic Safety Committee at our last meeting. Even without this development, there's currently complaints about traffic on Bank Street and Tompkins, that people use that as a shortcut, either going down from 9D to the train station or up from Bank, from West Main, up Bank Street and around, that there is no traffic, there's no stop sign at Tompkins and Bank, and that cars just careen around that corner, apparently, in both directions. And the several neighbors living in that area are very concerned about that. So I believe the city is looking at putting a stop sign there.
So that's Tompkins and Banks. Yes, that's the intersection you have to come to before you get to 9D.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of that study, so I can certainly look at that.
I don't know if it's gotten as far as a study yet.
Oh, wow, okay.
These were complaints from neighbors.
Oh, I see.
But
This
this
is
is
anecdotal.
before this 16 West Main and before Edgewater. I mean, once both of those come in, it's going to be crazy there.
Yes.
Sorry, that's qualifying it, but it's going to be very busy.
You should probably expand your view into those as part of it. Can you go and look up towards Bank and Thompson?
Correct, and that's what our recommendation
Okay.
was that they look at that intersection from a pedestrian safety standpoint and just from a existing conditions standpoint of the features that are there. At 9D, we did not recommend it at Bank and Tompkins, but as the planning board may be getting aware of, that perhaps they should look there as well. That wasn't our initial recommendation, though.
Is there, and I hope I didn't hear this wrong, but is there adequate pedestrian walkway at Bank and West Main?
No.
Because that's where I would imagine that people who are walking to the train station, commuters, are walking down West Main, crossing Bank, and if you're going to increase the amount of traffic utilizing that intersection to go up Bank to the one-way in driveway to go into the parking area at the back of the 16 West Main development, then it would behoove us to do better, have better pedestrian features for people crossing Bank at that intersection, right, making their way to the train station? Because there's no sidewalk on the other side, is there? I
I'm
can't
unsure.
recall.
The last time I did a site visit here was back in 2020. I do know that one of our comments was to have them look at the pedestrian access from the development to the train station, because that'll definitely be one of the perks of this site. So again, that's another recommendation that we had in our previous letter. So I think what would be good is if they take our letter from 2020 and respond to it.
I think the sidewalk is only on the north side where the development is.
Got it.
So that's the thing, is if you're walking to the train station, coming down the hill from, going past the hardware store towards the train station, you've got no walkway at Bank and West Main, no traffic light there. And so if you have more people are going to be coming in and out, then you've got more hazards to pedestrians.
Well, to your point, though, you should take your 2020 letter and respond to that.
Yeah, I think that would be, the letter that we've provided to the board for this meeting expands on that. It acknowledges that the development hasn't changed in size, that based on the most recent publication for the IT is mentioned, trip generation has gone down, but that being said, there are still outstanding comments that I think would be beneficial to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. There was a member of the public that stood up and, yeah.
Hi, my name is Mary Ellen Case. I live at 9 High Street, so I'm sort of up on the hill, and I can see quite a bit. I'm not sure when the study was done in 2020, but it has significantly changed just because of what happened with the pandemic. But I came from Lower Westchester, so I understand traffic. So there was quite a bit of traffic. Obviously, it slowed down with the pandemic. So I think I'm not sure of the timing of the study, but I think that's a significant change. It slowed down. I can see, like, because I'm sort of on the corner, so that, you know, people fly down to make the train constantly, right? They're just flying in and out. They fly up High Street, which is where I live. They'll make the illegal turn because everything's so backed up. I have an office at 1183 North Avenue. That's where my office is. So I see the nightmare with Tompkins and 9D always. It's very hard to make a left out of there. I see the people walking all the time down to Tompkins Terrace, like my neighbor mentioned. So of course I, you know, am all for, you know, development and stuff, but I feel like it's a very small space for 62 units. Are they going to be rentals? Are they going to be sold? Is there a roof deck, or is it a regular? You know, I'm just sort of curious on that. I think I saw something about a year ago that looked like there was a rooftop. There is a lot of noise. You can't really do a lot about it from the waterfront. It comes across the river, comes up the hill, you know, so if it is a roof deck, is it going to be, you know, what's it going to be? The view, I don't even know if the view has sold out yet. In fact, I don't think it has. That's another new building, as you know, that's right there on Beekman. And so I don't even know if we've seen the impact of the traffic from that, from the new townhouses that are right when you come out of the train station. And I'm not really quite sure what's going on up on the hill. I heard there was like 300 units going in. I don't know if that is also going to impact Tompkins. I'm not sure if there's another way into that. But there is quite a bit of traffic. It's people fly because they want to make the train. They're anxious when they get out. They want to get home. So I just think that that should be really taken into consideration.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Okay. Let's go around the board. Karen?
John, could you refresh our memory on the fourth story on this? Is this an as-of-right fourth story? Do they have to get any special permit for that?
No. As of right, you're allowed to have 48-foot fourth story. Has to be stepped back 15 feet from the front building edge along any building frontage. So along Bank Street and West Main, it'll have to be set back so that when you're at least close to the building, you won't be able to see the fourth story.
So from both streets, it has to be set back?
But there's no special permit required, or it's allowed by right in the linkage district as long as you meet the setback standards. I have had problems with their roof plan because you're allowed to have bulkheads, stairwell access to the roof, but they're putting other things up there that don't meet the 15-foot standard. So they've promised to take a second look at that. And we've asked for a complete roof plan because we've only got a partial roof plan at this point.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm glad people are talking about the opportunity, because this is sort of a corner linchpin site as part of the linkage developments that we're hoping to develop, that there's just the corner, the crosswalk that Len was bringing up is a really important part of making that pedestrian experience from Main Street to the train just not a better experience. And so I think that if one of the impacts that would be easy to ask of this applicant would be to improve that intersection for pedestrians. And that should be something that for every project that's developed, and there may be other projects, other developments along here, hopefully, that make it more of a dynamic and interesting part of the city that's connected. So
which intersection are you talking about?
Just Bank
and West Main.
West Main. And also, I don't know if we can, with this project, address the real complicated issues with traffic safety from the train station to the bridge. But that has to be something the city has to do.
Well, looking at the impacts that they may be creating or exacerbating, you can have them look to mitigate or help to mitigate some of those impacts.
One thing I've suggested in not in relation to this, but in relation to just the traffic on Beekman Street in particular. But I think I raised it during the Edgewater review as well, is that if you put a three-way or four-way stop at West Main and Beekman, it would prevent people from flying down the hill. It would allow left turns out of West Main Street because you would have a protected stop, so that you would, and that would prevent people from wanting to go up Tompkins Terrace and face the left turn there, because it would be easy to get out of West Main with the traffic coming down to the train station. And it seems to be a simple solution, not costly. It would slow down everything for pedestrians as well, so that you could cross the street there at West Main without having fear of people coming down that hill and swinging right to get down to the Metro North parking lots. That would be a simple solution that I think would help Tompkins Terrace, because right now, any of those buildings and houses in that area have two choices: to either take a left turn out of West Main or take a left turn out of Tompkins Terrace, neither of which are attractive. If you made West Main easy to get out of, then you have a light up at Beekman Street and Route 9D that would allow you to get out onto, and it would take the pressure off Tompkins Terrace, I think, from both Edgewater and this potential development.
I would just add to the comment about the pedestrian use is that in addition to the commuters going to the train station, I have observed, in making weekend trips to the hardware store, that there are folks who are using that sidewalk to get to the riverfront park. So it's an everyday use, not just a 5-day-a-week commuter use. But that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Jill?
Yeah, I like the idea of the three-way stop at West Main and Beekman. I think whatever we can do to, whatever the city can do to encourage pedestrian access along this route to further the connection to the riverfront. What is it that we're supposed to decide just tonight? Is it very limited?
We're reviewing.
No decisions, no decisions necessarily tonight. You've opened your SEQRA public hearing. I think we heard tonight that the applicant has, some responses that they need to get back to the board and to the consultants on, so it's continuing your review of the project.
And what, one member of the public was asking about construction. Do we have any idea how long that would last? How long construction might last on a building this size?
You have to ask the applicant that.
We can put together a construction schedule, approximate schedule to present. I don't have the exact answer tonight.
What did you have in your SEQRA document?
I think we had 18 months, but I don't recall. I know we spoke a little bit about the piles was kind of more of a focus with the construction before. I'm not sure the total duration though.
So then if you could put a schedule together.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
And I think also listening to the comment from your neighbor there with respect to the impact on her business, debris and things like that, I think that's something you should seriously consider how to minimize that. Jason?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, I wasn't here last month, unfortunately, and these documents were not in tonight's packet. Are these documents from last month's packet? These documents are not.
These are
not
all.
part of today's
So
packet.
this one plan was resubmitted. That's all that we resubmitted. But this is the site distance plan.
Right,
Sorry,
I know,
but
but,
the other ones were just from prior submissions.
Was
yeah.
it last?
Yeah.
was it,
Nothing. Sorry.
Was it last month's submission? Because I
Was it
missed
last
it.
Yes.
month?
Yes.
Before
Prior,
that.
right.
Yeah, it was part of the.
Because
Yeah.
it's I mean, if in generally as John said, if these are meeting the zoning requirements, I tend to not opinion differently, but I do, as someone noted, I do care deeply about the sort of collective views that are sort of lost of the river for the public when we build these buildings that sort of overwhelm the views of the river or of the views. But generally speaking, I'll have to look at these past documents a little bit better. I missed last month's reviews. I'll keep it at that.
Well, it sounds like what we're going to do is, unless the applicant has specific responses to some of the questions or statements brought up by the public, I think we're going to keep the SEQRA public hearing open until the answers are received, and then we'll revisit this again next month. Is that good, everybody else? All right, can I have a motion? Do I need a motion for that, Jen?
You don't, but
Okay.
it never hurts to do it by motion.
To keep the SEQRA open.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Technology works, right?
Most of the time.
It freezes every time, it just throws me out.
We have next is Prophecy LLC, maybe?
Yeah, could you pull it, because it just went blank.
Sure thing. Yeah, it's, I'm pretty sure it is.
1113 Wolcott.
Yeah, Prophecy Theater, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's taken a second to come up with it.
Okay, sorry everybody, technical difficulty here. Continued, we're going to, item 3, continued review of applications for special use permit and site plan approval, hotel and event space, 1113 Wolcott Avenue, submitted by Prophecy Theater LLC. Hey.
Good evening, Acting Chairman, members of the board, Taylor Palmer with Cuddy and Fader. I will also say, although I can't bid Etha full due because we will get to hang out with her next week at zoning board, but if she gets stuck playing golf or anything else in the next phase, we want to thank you. You're a really model of true great governance, and we were very privileged to have worked with you for all of that time. So thank you, Etha. With that, Acting Chairman, we are here, as you mentioned, for the continued review of the application. I am joined by the applicant, Gavin Hecker, who's here on behalf of Prophecy Theater LLC, as well as Richard D'Andrea, our traffic consultant from Colliers Engineering, R.A. Siegel, our architect, and Mr. Bodendorf, our engineer. Just by way of brief update, I know you've had a long night so far this evening. We are just here to provide you with an update on our discussions with the Zoning Board of Appeals. We last appeared before you at your March 8th meeting. At that time, you referred us to the zoning board, not for an area variance, but for a discussion specific to the SEQRA review. They are an involved agency in the SEQRA process. So we were there at their March 15th and April 19th meetings to discuss the project. Rich will speak to these details just in a few minutes, but we did provide a supplemental submission to your board dated April 26th, which incorporated some of the DOT's comments. It also provided an update to the board about some of our other circulation items on the site. As you know, we had originally proposed a circular drive in front of the church. Of course, based on the board's comments, we've removed that, and we've changed the site circulation throughout the property. But again, Rich will touch specifically on that and DOT's thoughts about that. During our discussions with the DOT, they were, of course, focused primarily on the off-street parking, as well as any potential impacts regarding community character and traffic circulation into and out of the site. We understand that a memo is forthcoming from the zoning board to your board, so it sounds like they'll have that prepared at next either Tuesday or Wednesday's meeting. I forget which day it will be next week. It'll be Tuesday. It's Juneteenth that we submit the different date. So that'll come to you for June. We are going to be asking that the board consider scheduling its public hearing for the application. We had talked about in March just getting the site plan and layout sort of in line so that we'd have enough materials ready to be able to put that before the public. Of course, this is not a subdivision, so Ms. Gray pointed out how we don't have a SEQRA public hearing, but this might be one of those instances where public involvement or input might be helpful for the board in considering the SEQRA impacts. So with that, I will turn to Rich. I just want to know we did incorporate additional trees and landscape screening to the plan. We did update our trail and stair configuration as it goes through the cemetery down. We did add some more traditional historical compatible light designs. So that was Mr. Clark's comment previously. And we did adjust the path as well. So now for the good stuff, I'll send it over to Rich to walk through some of those updates for the board.
Good evening. Rich D'Andrea, Colliers Engineering and Design. So I think Taylor mentioned our office submitted basically 3 things to your board for this month as updates. One was responses to Creighton Manning's, your traffic consultant's comments. That included one of the things we had discussed last month or 2 months ago was providing a sensitivity analysis of the traffic and parking conditions to address potentially to address the traffic distribution of traffic to the off-site parking locations that we've identified, as well as some lower credits for the number of people that would be staying in the hotel and also attending the events. So that was one of the things that we provided in our response to the Creighton Manning comments. It was an attachment as a technical memorandum or appendix to that. In general, those analyses don't really change the conclusions of our original traffic study. There are some comments from Creighton Manning on those analyses specifically, which we can address, but I just wanted to touch on those. So the other item that we received, as Taylor mentioned, was comments from the New York State Department of Transportation. We received those on April 7th. We provided some responses to those as well. Those were attached to our submission, and those have been provided back to the Department of Transportation as well. The biggest thing that they indicated in their comments was relative to the driveways to Route 9D, which I think was one of the main things that we were looking for input from them. Their indication was that they basically will not permit 2 exit locations from the site. So the way that we've currently proposed to address that is that during typical operations, the main entry driveway, or the southern entry driveway as it stands right now, would be a 2-way driveway. The northerly driveway to the north of the existing parsonage building would be a 1-way exit only driveway, but would be gated under typical operations. So it would not be used unless it's required by emergency vehicles, and would be gated most of the time. During events, the plan would be to provide for a 1-way clockwise circulation as we had previously proposed and discussed before, and that driveway would now be open, and the main entry driveway would be 1-way entry only. And the northerly entry driveway, or exit driveway, would be open and exit only. And that would be monitored by on-site attendants, and that traffic flow would have additional signage on site, and I'll get into that in a moment as well. The DOT had some other comments, which I think are some of them go to permits that we have to obtain from them, and we'll get into as we move forward, and some of them were towards the off-street parking, which we've provided them some additional information on for some clarification on those items. Lastly, and this is kind of what I want to get into a little bit more, is we provided I think we have previously provided your board with a draft traffic and parking management plan for the site, for the operation, and how we propose to handle the events for traffic circulation on the site, as well as disseminating information for parking, where people are going to park, how they're going to get to the facility, and things like that. So, like I said, it was previously a draft. We've made modifications to that. We've updated it based on some of the comments we've received, both from Creighton Manning, from DOT, from your board, from the ZBA as well. And we provided a more final version of that, not to say that there couldn't be changes to it still, but that was submitted to the board. And Ari, if you could switch to the next one down. Yeah. So I think we had shown this to you 2 months ago, but basically this is our proposed circulation pattern during the events. And this is straight out of the traffic and parking management plan. It's showing temporary signage to be installed at the driveways within the site to identify that one-way circulation pattern. At the moment, we're proposing like 3 parking attendants on site to manage that traffic flow, ensure that there's no issues with backups onto Route 9D, and make sure that we manage that traffic flow well. And then there's also some other off-site signage, which if you could just go to the next one, that we're potentially proposing, which I think we would have to get some buy-in from the city on, but providing, this is based on recommendations from Creighton Manning, providing some locations of off-site signage to direct people to off-site parking locations. So those are the general overview updates of what we provided, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you have.
Let's start with our profession, yeah.
I still have a lot of lingering parking concerns. And we've seen now that the restaurant is going to have 40 deck seating as well as the 50 indoor seating, which is a lot of cafe seating when there is no designated cafe parking lot if the hotel is filled. So it seems to me we're dealing with more sort of like 2 peaks. One during the day when there is, and this is a dead-end parking lot because the southern or the northern exit is closed. So now people who are going to the cafe will come in, the parking lot will be filled, and where do they do? If 2 or 3 come in, how do they back up and get out of there? It just seems like there's a real problem. Cafe people aren't as much.
Yeah, not the magnitude of an event
It's
situation
not like an
that
event
we've
where
alleviated.
you assume you could remote park and walk. Cafe people, restaurant patrons are going to want to park where they can park and go eat. So it seems to me there's still that sort of basic problem that there's not enough parking on the site to handle the 3 major uses that they're proposing. I think the agreement or tentative agreement with the funeral home is a good possibility. It's still, by my walking distance, 1,600 feet, which is a long distance, and you would have to walk by a couple residential, or drive by a couple residential streets where you could park on street, like Stratford or Rombout. So the incentive wouldn't be to go to the farthest lot and walk back up the hill. But it is at least some defined parking, whereas the Tompkin lot and the City Hall lot, there's been a lot of active discussions about redevelopment in those areas, so there's no guarantee that those lots will be there for public parking in the same capacities they are today in 3 or 4 or 5 years. In terms of the access, I'm still not satisfied with the access, in particular the fact that it's gone back to a sort of a dead-end parking lot rather than having some sort of loop in and out so that people who can't find a parking spot can easily get out without having to do a 3-point turn. And the DOT letter seems to me spells it out. They say DOT recommends either designing for a circular driving pattern, a loop road, or eliminating the exit altogether, which doesn't solve the dead-end parking lot situation. And then the second point expresses concern about potential accidents and pedestrians making sort of random stops on Route 9D or crossing Route 9D, not at crosswalks, because the entrance will be jammed and people want to get out to go to the event. So if they see things backed up in the driveway, maybe they'll just pull off to the curb and then unload and in the travel lane. So it seems to me there's a lot of problems here. The DOT didn't like this solution, and yet they, to me, made it worse by closing gating the exit for most of the period. It's only at large events where they'll have this. So if the event is 125 people at a wedding, you'll have a dead-end parking lot with all this people going in and not being able to get out, in theory. So all those are still on the table in terms of, and then the final point I made is the ADA access. There's 2 ADA spaces for the hotel, but none for the event. So what happens for people who have disabilities and don't want to walk from remote lots, or, how will that be handled? I've been asking that question for months and haven't gotten an answer.
I reiterate what Mr. Clark has said, but to expand upon those that have special needs during these special events, that's also going to back the queue up further on 9D. You get somebody in there with a van that may have a ramp that has to come down. I know they talk about queuing 2 lanes within the site, possibly, but now have a van with a ramp, and that has taken both lanes. So how are these things going to be handled during these large events?
I can address a little bit of the circulation, then maybe Rich can address the van. When we were considering this circulation of the one-way circulation during the events, based on the northern driveway being the exit, it's because if you're approaching from the north on Wolcott, you don't want somebody to have to make this quick turn in, because, and I went out there when we were discussing this and actually looked carefully at this myself, and it's just that you can't see the church building, you can hardly see the parsonage building until you're right on that driveway. So anybody driving down and that wants to get in is going to have to either make a quick turn if they just happen to see it all of a sudden, or they'll pass by it and have to do a U-E or whatever to get to the driveway again. So with that in mind, it's also right in front of that crosswalk, the pedestrian crosswalk. So the thought is that if somebody does try to make a quick turn there and there's somebody crossing the street, then that's not a good situation, and we'd much rather have 90% of the time, it's going to be the hotel, but we're not going to have this amount of traffic flowing in. So a car will be able to pull in the main driveway, come out the main driveway. There's not going to be a backup. They're not going to be able to exit on the north driveway because it's closed off at that time. So this was all a logical conclusion that we discussed carefully and came up with this circulation. During the event, it won't be confusing because we'll have people there to direct people, and even though you won't be able to be dropped off on the right side, it'll be a better situation than having to have a quick turn into that circulation to go the counterclockwise direction. And that was the thought behind that. And that's kind of all I wanted to say on that. It seems to us the safer, logical entrance. Also, like that's a skinnier, thinner driveway to the north there, and it's in between the West End lofts and the parsonage. So it's really it's not ideal to have that open all the time.
I do have one other thing, Randall, before we go on with regards to the traffic. So on the north side of the building, they're showing 3 parallel parking stalls. That access is now going to be gated. How are those 3 going to get out of there?
So to that, I think the 2 that are closest to the gate would be identified as employee parking. The one that's further from the gate, we could adjust the space location a little bit if we had to, but I think that could just be a typical back out space almost. Well, it's a little further down the driveway for sure, but it could almost be a typical back out space under typical conditions.
So we'll be able to show that on the plans, show that it can actually maneuver and make those backing movements. And
yeah.
If you had to, we'd also discuss that same issue and whether or not those employees might also have access or ability to exit through that gate that's also there. So again, it's not a general access gate, but if you're an employee, that might be an opportunity to utilize that if that were the necessary, ingress egress movement.
Has there been any thought to making this a circular drive like DOT may be recommending here?
We've talked about it. I don't know that we're 100% opposed to it. I just don't know that it's necessary all the time. But we could look at it further.
Right. I think a continued discussion that we've had with, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Karen. It looked like you were going to jump on that one. That we've been trying to address the large events, right? So we have to plan for large events. We can't just live in the realities of the most of the time. We have to live in what could create the potential impact, and that's the large events that are on site. So we're certainly trying to plan for that, and that's why we're sort of incorporating all of these details. Rich's original traffic study identified that there is available off-street parking. The board had specific questions about what if certain lots, are used up for other developments or aren't available for whatever other reasons. We went out then, and I don't know if this information was actually presented to the board, but we have been in discussions. We're still working out the logistics of the agreement, but we have private agreements that we're working to put in place to also provide for off-street parking during those hours. So we're adding, although the study says we've already got it available in public parking areas in proximity to the site, we're trying to put some more gravy on the potatoes as far as having some more available assured parking for those larger events. The same is true of this traffic circulation. As Gavin was just sort of discussing, the general use of the site will function effectively, and the traffic study and our sensitivity analysis goes through some of those details. I don't know if they've incorporated fully DOT's comments yet. We've just had initial responses because it's really just DOT's initial comments here. But ultimately, that's the general conditions, not the major, the large event conditions where we're implementing those other signage and other avenues. John, and of course we did also remove the original circular driveway in front of the church. So we're trying to do a lot of things here to address the comments. We certainly understand, and we're not, done by any stretch. We're here to hear your comments, and of course, we'll certainly want to hear at some point too from the public. I think all of that will help kind of funnel maybe that design to where, it can really be a fully functional site and project.
John, were you done?
I'm done, yeah. I think Karen had
Karen,
something.
you were going to say something?
Could you speak to, it seems to me that if you had a consistent traffic pattern where you enter on the southern driveway and you exit on the northern driveway, that would eliminate any confusion as to how you navigate the site during event times or non-event times. Could you speak to your reasoning why you won't just have a circular driveway?
Again, I think we can consider that. In my opinion, what we've laid out in the traffic and parking management plan for the circulation, it applies regardless of the access condition. So if we have a gated driveway on the north driveway, or if we have that as a full-time exit, I think it still needs to be managed to ensure that the circulation happens appropriately. There's no queuing back out onto 9D. So we'll look at the access conditions, but I think the traffic and parking management plan as it stands applies to both conditions.
But I think we're looking at other things, Rich, like Mr. Clark brought up, those coming into the cafe. You've got 40 on the deck, 50 inside. It's a nice day outside. Friday, everybody wants to go out. And you've got people in the hotel. There's insufficient parking on the site. People don't know that until they drive through. It's behind the building. So now you're going to have one car after another entering that site. They're all going to queue up on one another. And how do we get them out?
I'm gonna just do one solid here and throw your traffic consultant onto the hot mic. Might we ask the city's traffic consultant is here, so we certainly have prepared our reports to try and incorporate these comments, not to defer from Mr. Russo's comments, but just in case there's criteria there, because we're trying to address the traffic issues. We're hearing the other community
Right.
pocket into the overall SEQRA discussion, so we're hearing that to work it into the design, but just in case there's specifics there on the traffic. So that is part of what we're working on here, and I'm sure they only got it as recently as we did for DOT. But I don't know if the board wants to have start.
Yeah, let's start.
I'm here for. I'll go briefly over the comments that we had on the last submittal from Colliers. Regarding their sensitivity analysis, we did have just like some technical comments and corrections. I spoke with Rich about that, and our comment letter kind of goes over that. So we'll be expecting a revised or corrected sensitivity analysis regarding the traffic and parking. We noted that they're in the agreement, or working on the agreement for the additional parking, Riverview Funeral Home. We also looked at their traffic management plan for the events, and we had one comment that we're kind of going back and forth on about the attendant at the entrance. Eventually we'll come down to the board to kind of maybe opine on that. I will say that I know that the DOT has regarding the two entrances or two driveways on a state roadway, the state does have, I forget the exact name of it, it's like the policy on highway accesses, and they say that normally only one driveway is given to a minor commercial residential use. So that's where their comment originates from about having only one driveway. As for the circulation for event or for the cafe, if it's now a 90-seat restaurant, that was, I have to say, that was news to me. I thought it was still just the 50-seat cafe.
We asked them to provide a seating chart for the deck, and they came up with 40 seats on the deck and 50 seats inside.
Okay. So I think that then we can add to the comment that in a revised, in their sensitivity analysis, or they provided just a traffic study that looks at a 90-seat restaurant, if that's what is going to be considered the quantity of seats at the restaurant, that does change the trip generation for the site. But that's all I have there. Again, like I said, it was some technical comments on the sensitivity analysis.
Can I ask, you said that DOT prefers one driveway, I understand that, on a major arterial. But you said for a minor residential type use.
Sorry, I meant minor commercial residential type use, yes.
Yeah. But this really isn't a minor use. It's a 30-room hotel, a 50 or 90 restaurant
That's correct.
Plus events.
I think I'm just saying, or kind of giving the board some reference onto where the DOT probably pulled that from. It is the state's roadway, so at the end, it is their decision to make, but.
Can that decision be appealed, or is that pretty much your experience that we're not going to get any movement on that?
I'm not sure on that. That's out of my knowledge on whether a planning board can appeal the DOT. I would defer to your attorney.
I think it's something that should be discussed with DOT. Whether there's a formal process, I don't know. But I think it's something that can be discussed either between the applicant and DOT, or if the city wants to be a participant in those discussions as well. That could be part of it.
But here, the first recommendation in DOT's letter is to recommends either a design for a circular driving. So they're willing to have two driveways, they just don't want to have two exits next to each other.
Yeah, so to that point, I did specifically ask DOT the question as a follow-up to this. I haven't received a response yet, of if we went to a one-way circulation in either direction, would they have a preference? And or if we went to the situation that we currently have now, would that be an acceptable situation? So I haven't received a response on that, but I anticipate that we
Good
will.
questions.
So that was one item. The other thing I just wanted to point out, that Stark was making a reference to minor commercial. That DOT has a specific standard for what's considered a minor commercial versus a major commercial. Typically, a major commercial development has a specific generation associated with it, and or it's over 100,000 square feet in total area of development of the buildings. So I'm not sure that this actually falls into that. That's why they're classifying it as a minor commercial, but that's just their standards. part of their standards.
And I just wanted to flag one other point. The points are well taken, brought up by about, showing the seating upstairs. The cafe isn't being designed to accommodate that many people. It's not being designed so we'll have to submit something to the board that reflects that information. We were asked to show what you could put out on that deck, so we did, but we'll be very clear in a supplemental submission as to what capacity and utilization that cafe will stand. The non-simultaneous use discussion aside, we'll address that. But we appreciate those comments. The intent is not, as I understand it, to have X and Y, meaning inside and outside. It was showing what could be done on that location, whether it is at an event or otherwise. So we'll address that.
One thing that wasn't that I didn't see in the traffic management is that what size of an event triggers the one-way system and the on-site monitors or traffic people. Would it happen in a 150 people wedding or a 225 person concert? But only,
Yeah, I mean, considering we are providing all parking off-site for those events, I would anticipate that it would be for any event, basically. Whether that necessitates having 3 traffic monitors for that event, I don't, for a certain size event, we didn't get into that specifically, but I would think that if we're going to have all parking off-site and have potentially pick-up and drop-off operations happening on the site, then we have to have some kind of monitors on-site to ensure that it flows correctly.
Kevin?
I just had a question. I wanted to clarify that you're not providing off-site parking. You're utilizing existing off-site parking, right?
Well, right. We're utilizing existing off-site public parking as well as potentially we're working on an agreement to provide 40 some odd spaces.
The use of existing.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's not presently utilized,
Right.
correct.
It's good. Okay. Just want to clarify their language.
Lynn?
It just, it seems like there's a lot that still, needs to be sort of worked out. But I think there is one lesson learned here that is like screaming at me. There are other, right now, underutilized houses of worship in Beacon. And we better be very much tuned into, as a board, if there are other instances where properties get carved up for developments, that we don't leave a massive building that can accommodate a lot of people and have a lot of very, very diverse, neat uses marooned on a parcel that half of which is a cemetery, such that you can't do anything, that you're bending over backwards to try to figure out how to utilize that structure with what you're left with. Because it doesn't seem like we'll run into this again, but we may. You look at like St. Luke's as a church that's doesn't have a congregation using it, on a weekly basis right now. And, this may not be the last time we run into this.
Certainly, I would address that just because it sounds like a concern of setting a precedent. Naturally, the location of this church or the existing facilities is down close to the train station. We're talking about, separate, a different end of Main Street, proximity to, walkability. There's a lot of distinctions. So each application would have to be looked at its own merits, whether it's in a historic district, all kinds of other considerations. So it's certainly, just because something is approvable on one lot, would certainly not be justification or precedent, so to speak, unless it was the exact same facts that you were considering in that application.
Jill?
When you say you're going to be utilizing off-site parking, are you going to do valet parking?
So there's a couple different concepts that are incorporated into the different strategies of the traffic management plan and then the sensitivity analysis, which can probably speak more specifically to the valet aspect of it. But there's considerations of shuttling. One of the private parking agreement that we're considering would allow for people to park there and walk, but there is, in our management plan, we're identifying if there is need, the ability to have shuttle. I don't think valet was, it's not currently in the plan, but that is, I think, a strategy that could also be available if necessary. But that isn't currently in the plan.
JC?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I do want to recognize, I think the configuration, the removal of the original proposed driveway through the front of the church is a great improvement. I think it's, but I'm still in agreement with Mr. Clark and others who have expressed that, again, it seems to me like, just, what's the word? Just very straightforward to have a circular around the building circulation that would avoid confusion. And again, just looking at the plan, I mean, again, I mentioned this 2 months ago, that I personally don't see the benefit in sort of cutting off that existing pathway at the curb, which seems to me like unfortunate, outcome of this wider driveway. If this was a thinner driveway, you'd have that historic path connecting to the sidewalk, which I think makes better sense. And also, again, I'm not convinced personally that having a crosswalk relatively close to a exit to a driveway is necessarily an unprecedented thing, because most crosswalks are at the corners of blocks where cars exit, and turn. So it's somewhat a similar situation to a corner intersection where a car comes out of the corner and meets a crosswalk. So I just think that there's a number of reasons why avoiding the possibility of a dead end during hours when the northern exit is closed off. There's a number of reasons to maintain that option that the DOT obviously has also supported.
And DOT may come, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I would ask you to, reconsider making that southern driveway from 2 to 1. It just seems empirically, evident that it would be a less confusing circulation.
Understood. And DOT may rue the day with the comments that come back. So we're certainly, we hear those comments, and we're certainly maybe walked to that conclusion as well. But we're not that we're not running to it, but we may be driven there.
There's a whole lot more we can do tonight, right?
The only ask that we would have, I mean, the site plan itself and the layout and the function of the site, I mean, it's pretty fully baked as far as the overall operations. There are some components that may benefit again from public input, understanding that the board may consider incorporating those comments into the SEQRA review. Again, not a requirement by SEQRA analysis purposes. It's an unlisted action, but if the board would see fit in potentially scheduling a public hearing for the June meeting, as I mentioned, the ZBA will be submitting its comments they've already drafted a resolution. It has to be discussed at their meeting next week, but you would have the benefit of that in advance of that meeting. Again, the comments are going to be a lot, spoiler alert, there are a lot of what we've talked about for good reason, because those are the issues that are driving the discussion. The parking, access, the circulation, those are all a lot of what you'll hear. So I think it'll be beneficial for the board to have those recommendations, but there'll be a lot, or almost very similar to what you've seen with our discussion. So that would be the only ask, Acting Chairman, if the board considers setting the public hearing.
No reason that you could not. If the zoning board is poised to issue their comments to you next week, you would have those comments for your consideration in June. I don't know if that's the case or not.
I feel like the circulation issue is still outstanding, and seems to be like a significant issue. On whether it's a two-way street, into and out of, or one-way, how the circulation is operating.
We agreed, and we just think that might be beneficial to have the public sort of weigh in on it too, so that we know where the opinions are from whether it's the HOA or the other
So we would be doing a scheduling of public hearing so the public could weigh in on comments like that. So how do you feel about that?
Yes, but would we still keep the SEQRA public
Yes.
hearing open?
Yeah,
Okay.
nothing.
Yeah, then, yes, I think it's
There's
important.
no, let me just clarify, there's no secret public hearing.
There's no
This would be
secret.
just going straight to a public hearing.
Right,
on
at this time, the public
application.
can't comment.
You haven't acted on SEQRA yet. You don't need to act on SEQRA before we go to public hearing on this application. So that is still an open issue for you to determine.
Yes, I
And
support-
you can, yeah, and you'd be able to use
Get
the
the public
comments from the
input,
public, input from the public
Yes.
in making that decision.
Kevin?
Yes.
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 Yes, I agree.
Motion?
Motion.
Second.
Seconded.
Jill? Karen? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, all. Have a good night.
Item number 4, continued review of application for subdivision approval, 2-lot residential, 146 Verplanck Avenue, submitted by James Petty.
Good evening. Mike Bodendorf, Hudson Land Design, engineer for the applicant. I'm sitting in for Dan Kohler tonight. And just before I begin, while I'm fumbling around with this technology here, I just want to say, Etha, it's been a pleasure working with you. It's been many years of driving you crazy on the third Tuesday of the month. Yes. We might be behind why that deadline was moved to 3 p.m. when it used to be 4 p.m. I apologize for that, but Etha, it's just been a pleasure to work with you, and I wish you well in your future endeavors. So anyway, this is for a proposed 2-lot subdivision, 146 Verplanck Avenue. Let's see if this is coming up here. Yeah. Sure.
The board, there was no traffic comments regarding the next two
No.
items. So
You're good.
excuse myself.
Quick, before we change our mind.
Have a good night, Start.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Starr.
Okay. This thing's not really responding right now, so I'll just, at the last meeting, the board voted for their intent to act as lead agency and to prepare a draft negative declaration for consideration at this meeting. It usually comes right up. Problem is, it never sits in there.
While you do that, we'll just go to around the professionals, so you figure out any open items? John?
The only thing is a reminder that one of the lots will have a insufficient side yard. So we'll have to refer it to the ZBA for a variance, and you could provide a recommendation to the ZBA. Otherwise, they've addressed all my comments.
It's like 4.6 instead of 10 feet or something like that. Like 4.6 instead of 10 feet or something like that?
Yeah, 4.7 instead of 10.
Okay. John?
No, they've addressed most of our comments. They just have some cleanup items to address on the plans themselves.
Back in business, folks. Sorry about that. So we're just here tonight. They just discussed their comments. They're pretty minor and just general housekeeping style comments. So we're here to ask the board tonight to declare lead agency, possibly grant a negative declaration for seeker, and provide a positive referral to the ZBA. And we would also ask if we could possibly set a public hearing for the July meeting for subdivision.
Just kind of go around. Actually, Karen, let me see.
My only concern is, I guess, the extent of the side yard zoning request, so I do have some concern on that. Other than that, that's
Kevin?
it.
I'm fine with moving forward.
I'm okay with, also okay with moving forward. I read through the draft document. I didn't have any comments on it.
Okay. Jill?
No comment.
JC?
Yeah, I'm fine with moving forward.
So another quick question with respect to the recommendation to the ZBA. What are your feelings on that? Positive, neutral, negative?
I personally, just to clarify, there's only one variance, area variance, right?
Right,
That's
side
it.
yard, on the existing lot, not the proposed lot.
Right.
Is
And
it an
then-
existing?
No, it's, in order to create the new lot.
Oh, I see. It
They
would
don't, because of the placement of the building on the original lot, it doesn't quite meet the standard for a side yard. So that's the only variance.
There's a 10-foot easement. That's part of that 4'7" lot, right? That's within the 10-foot easement.
Yeah, there's a drainage easement that's running between the parcels.
Yeah, it's because it's a 100-foot lot, so each lot is 50 feet. The existing house is 4.7 feet off.
So my question is, how do you feel as a recommendation to the ZBA? Positive, neutral?
Positive. Positive.
Jill?
I think positive. I'm not seeing the,
What Jill considers, Lynn?
So the variance is between the existing, will be between the existing house and the proposed house. Right, and so I recall the applicants were, they're building, the new home is their proposed, they're building their new home and then moving out of the existing home.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Right, so I don't have a problem, I'm positive on the recommendation.
Just pause, if you could just bear with us, okay? All right, Ken?
Yeah, no problems.
All right. Karen?
No problem.
So, you're good?
I'm okay.
Okay, so, have a seat. Jen, can we do this in one, or can we do it in two? What would you recommend?
I would recommend a couple things.
Okay.
One, that you make a motion to declare yourself lead agency.
Motion to declare us public?
Motions.
Second. You got that? Jason? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then you also have before you Part 3, EAF Part 3 with a negative declaration. The draft was submitted to you in advance of tonight's meeting. Len mentioned during his comments that he reviewed the document and doesn't have any comments, so if you've reviewed that and you are fine with it, you can make a motion to adopt a negative declaration.
Motion?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and do we vote? Yeah, okay. And then with respect to the referral to the ZBA, you can make a motion to refer the application to the ZBA with a positive recommendation on the variance.
May I have that motion?
Motion.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Jill?
And then the last matter is whether you're going to also schedule a public hearing for July. So the applicant, this is May, so the applicant will likely be on the June ZBA meeting. If the applicant receives their variance at that June meeting, they'll be back to you in July. So they're asking for that meeting to be the meeting that you open the public hearing.
Can I have that motion?
Motion.
Seconded.
Sing. Jill? Lynn? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Moving on to item 5. Continued review of application for special use permit and site plan approval indoor and outdoor event space for Hanna Lane, submitted by Jason Hughes.
Good evening, R.A. Siegel representing the owner, and Jason Hughes is here as well. Let me just get this on the screen. Okay, so just to recap, the property is at 4 Hanna Lane, and it's part of the former Talix Foundry property. So the applicant's proposing to create an indoor event space in the existing building, and there's also an exterior event venue in the yard. So we submitted revised plans this month based on the comments we received at the last meeting. We provided a project narrative to explain the operation in more detail. We provided a design and drawings for the new food service structure. We clarified some of the site features, and we also provided an overall site plan and parking requirements for the full site, including the other tenants on the other parcels. I spoke to John Russo about some of his current engineering comments, so we'll provide more information about that. So the applicant's currently in discussion with the neighboring Talix property owner about how they might share parking spaces and how they might get permission to put additional lighting and landscaping on the adjacent property. So that I believe is still under discussion. But and then the only other thing, we're looking to establish a parking requirement for the for the outside event venue. Right now it says to be determined. I spoke to Dave Buckley about that. He mentioned using the sort of indoor auditorium type or church use parking requirement, which is one parking space for every 100 square feet, because it would be a measured thing, not a seated thing. So using that, we'd come up with somewhere, depending on how we measure it, between 50 and 58 spaces. But that's sort of assuming a full, fixed seat scenario. And this is much more spread out. People aren't, blankets, they bring chairs, they're seated in groups. So we'd like to, we are talking about providing at least that number of spaces, but we'd like to determine with the board some kind of a figure, and then we'll add that to the, overall parking count and have a set number for that. But, yeah, also, Jason, I don't know if you want to talk about your discussions with the neighbors there.
I've had a number of positive discussions with with more than one board member, as well as a number of the residents of Talix Commercial Condo Association. No one has expressed any concerns. The biggest issue is that their board is only 3 members, and so they cannot come up with a quorum without everyone being there. And they cannot seem to get all 3 of those people in the same place at the same time right now. So that's my biggest holdup with them. The individuals that I've spoken with have their range of things has varied from we can definitely work this out to we're really excited for this. That's the range of feedback that I've gotten from the residents there. So it's the waiting right now. Any other updates I can give on anything?
Not at the moment, John Clark.
I want to, in the narrative, it avoided the hours of operation, how late it'll run at night,
Sure.
particularly, which is where the noise concern might happen. So if you could
Absolutely.
clarify that.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously everything is different. We're talking about a very flexible usage of the space. In our past usage for events, in our summer concert series last summer, for example, I believe we came down by 10 p.m. The PA was off by 10 p.m. and there were people mingling for a little while after that, as people do after a concert. And the space was clear by 10:30, 10:40, and the staff was breaking down after that for a little while, but with no amplified sound.
Well, if you can just provide, your best, something that we can hold you to.
Absolutely.
In terms of the late night hour on weekends and weekdays.
Yes. Oh, and weekdays would certainly be earlier.
Right. And then, there was varied numbers about the, how many people are going to be allowed in the indoor space. It was 98, 99,
based on my
120.
conversation with Dave Buckley, we've put a number on that of 100 as the cap, based on egresses and based on the lack of sprinklers. Dave put us at 100 or less. And as to one other question comment, it would not be simultaneous occupancy indoor and out. So we would not have up to 100 indoor with 200 outdoor. In the event of an outdoor event, the indoor space is ancillary to that event. It is an auxiliary space, whether it is a catering prep space or a smaller group space, something like that. It is not there would never be a situation where there was something happening inside with something else happening outside and dual occupancy.
So if you can provide information on that so that would affect your parking count.
Of course.
So, and that's what, I agree with Dave in the sense that it seems that the best solution is one for each 4 indoor seats and 1 space for each 100 square feet of outdoor. So come up with your peak scenario and make the case that there's no simultaneous use of indoor and outdoor that would add to the parking count. And then you could use that number, or at least present that number for the board.
Thank you.
The walking to the site, have you considered how you get from the front gates on both Fishkill and Main Street to there safely in a
What I can say
concert or venue situation?
I lived on that property for 7.5 years, and I can tell you that there has always been a steady flow of pedestrian traffic down Hanna Lane. People coming from all over prefer to cut down Hanna Lane rather than walking over to Blackburn. Even after the city put sidewalks on my side of Blackburn, Hanna Lane is definitely the pedestrian thoroughfare. There's a gate at the bottom onto Main Street. People walk along the train tracks. There is sidewalk on the Main Street side. There is sidewalk all the way to the gate and through the gate.
Right. Does it go all the way to the building? That's the question.
Well, it goes all the way up to the parking lot.
Right. So one of the solutions might be to put a crosswalk, a designated crosswalk where the stop sign is going to be.
Right.
And then have some way of getting from there to the front door of the building. An asphalt path, a gravel path, something that's ADA compliant. It wouldn't be that much to make that connection, a crosswalk, and then the connection between that.
A huge majority of these notes are requesting me to do work on other people's property. I'm not averse to this. I'm just, I am, again, limited in what I can promise you without talking to the owners of these properties that you're asking me to do things to.
If you're going to have to come up with a lease agreement with him or whoever the adjacent owner is, if you're willing to do improvements on his property, I can't imagine that would be a big holdup, but I don't know the parties.
Let me ask you this. So the 2 buildings across from you, do you own those parcels also?
I own, I'm sorry, across in which direction? I'm sorry.
So directly across the parking lot?
Yes, I own 12 and 16 Hanna Lane.
So you own these?
Yes.
So
Not that one. Not by your pinky.
No.
Right.
I wasn't pointing to that. So basically, you could put the crosswalk in along this location.
I could.
Because it is on your property.
The sidewalk leading to there, up from Main Street, is not my property.
No, I understand that,
Okay.
but the sidewalk extends around onto your property.
The sidewalk ends at the curb of that corner, and it's item 4 next to it. The sidewalk does not touch my property at current. I'm not saying it couldn't, it's very close, but it does not extend onto my property at present.
Okay. The plan shows it does, so.
Okay. We'll have to look at that.
That'll have to be looked at, but,
Sure.
Even
No
if it
problem.
doesn't, there's still the ability to put a crosswalk in
Certainly.
across what is yours. Where the warehouse overflow storage trailer is, I think that probably could be shifted a little bit to allow for an access to be constructed, as John is asking.
Well, we already, there was already a request from John that we've that we've agreed to with the sidewalk extension.
Well, that was for me right here.
Oh, right, okay.
So those that are in this parking lot
Right.
don't have to walk across the grass to get there.
Right.
And there's no way, now you're sending them from this parking lot back into your main
Right,
parking
right. No, I
lot to walk
understand.
around, so.
Right, I'm
That
saying
made
there's a
sense
yes.
there. So, but nothing says you couldn't put a walk along the front and over to that area.
Is that just hashing out an area of the pavement? Is that just
If it's
creating?
pavement right now, yeah, it could be simply hatching it out.
Okay.
And we were also talking about it, if we can adjust things on that other property in the parking lot that we're trying to lease, that those are oversized right now.
Yeah.
Both the spaces and the aisle. So we could create another,
Walkway along this whole length of that.
Right,
Yeah,
But that's on the.
I would say that some of our parking, an 18-foot parking spot makes sense for most vehicles, but some of our parking involves a box truck and, a 26-foot long Sprinter. So, those are 2 of our company vehicles. So a couple of longer parking spots isn't crazy. Instead of restricting
If you
everything
want
to
to,
be 18-foot spots.
it's a minimum.
Right.
I was just trying to preserve a walking, so
Right.
people didn't have to walk through the parking lot.
I understand. I think
When
it's
you
worth
have
noting.
events, you don't want people walking through the parking lot with cars backing out and that sort of thing. If you have an option to just stripe the spaces such that you have an asphalt path along the far edge.
Right.
But we understand you have to get approval to do such. It's
Thank
on
you.
somebody else's property.
Yeah, thank you.
John, I didn't get, sorry, I didn't get the copy of your memo.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mail them out this year. Yeah, it should be on the website.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw it this evening for the first time. I
Yeah,
apologize.
I forgot, I'm sorry. I realized this as I was driving.
JC, any comments?
No comments, sir.
Joe?
Thank you.
No comment.
Lynn?
No other questions? No comments?
Kevin?
I'm fine.
None at this time.
What do you like? Where are we with this? Jen?
So the next step, well, I will mention one thing. I know at the last meeting, the board authorized circulation of notice of intent for SEQRA purposes. In looking at the information submitted by the applicant, it looks like this is actually a type 2 action, which would not require SEQRA review whatsoever. So a lead agency letter has not gone out because there's no need to circulate if there's no SEQRA review. So if that changes at any time as a result of further information, we can talk about that. But at this point, I think, myself and the rest of the consultants agree that it's a type 2 action that wouldn't require SEQRA review. Procedurally, the next step, once you're ready for it, would be to schedule a public hearing on the application.
Everybody comfortable with that?
Yep.
Have a motion?
Push. Motion.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
So you can ignore my last comment about the EAF.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, review of application for subdivision approval, 2-lot residential, 46 Judson Street, submitted by 46 Judson Street LLC. Good evening.
Good evening. Glennon Watson from Beatty and Watson Surveying and Engineering in Cold Spring. I don't get here very often, but I've been here many times over the years, and I'll be the last one. I'll be the last one.
Got here just in time.
So, congratulations. Also with Paula Dowder, principal of 46 Judson Street, we're seeking approval of a 2-lot subdivision of about 15,000 square feet, already improved with a garage, another outbuilding, and a house which will remain on one lot. We're hoping to divide the property into 2 lots of about 8 and 6, a little over 8,000 square feet, a little over 6,000 square feet each. We have received Mr. Russo's comments with regard to, one with regard to an item in the zoning that I missed that I have to correct, a couple of other questions that he's raised that we feel we should address before we go into any real detail in explaining the subdivision to you. So what we're hoping tonight is that you'll just declare yourself to be lead agency if that's appropriate, that we'll receive any other comments you might have and answer any questions you might have.
John, Clark?
The only comments that I had, I think it's not typical and it's not advisable to put the garage on the front of the building. And the driveway as proposed is it's right up against a big spruce tree and a telephone pole or a utility pole. So I suggested, and I know there's a slope issue on that side, so it involved like a cut to get it in, but it seems advisable to put the driveway off Union Street rather than off Judson, so that it could go to the back of the house and leave the corner frontage for the house itself. I don't know if that's physically possible.
It's actually quite difficult. We've looked at that, and we came up with the same thing, basically trying to match your downward grade, then your upward grade, and then flattening it off to go into a garage from that end is quite difficult. And there's a large, I'm going to say maple tree, but I've never.
Yeah, it's on the back.
At the back,
Yeah.
which will cause some sight distance issues for somebody exiting the driveway. So it was my immediate reaction to when John advised us that we're too close to the property line, and I started fussing with it, and I said, well, I'll do that, and we're still looking at that. But
Okay.
It
I
does
do
have its issues.
concerns with that. When we've done work over there, the concern is the speed of the vehicles that travel that road.
On Union Street?
Oh, yeah. oh, yeah.
Where are they going?
It seems like they're going to a fire somewhere.
So if you're saying that the driveway has to be off Judson, then it has to be moved south, and you lose you have to relocate the utility pole and lose the spruce tree.
That's a real possibility. Another possibility is to seek a variance on moving the driveway closer to the property line. If the board, that would probably be easier for us if the board was of the mind that would be a good idea. I can talk with you, talk with Mr. Russo about the advisability of that. But
Would that, I mean, you're putting the driveway very close to the spruce tree, even with it,
yes. Yeah,
the
and
location as shown, so it seems to me you might lose the tree anyway.
We might, and so that's the obvious solution, is take the tree out, move the pole over to the new property line, take the guy wire that's also in the way, and reposition that so that we get a clear driveway
Yeah.
without a variance.
And if you can, put the garage in the back, so the
Yes.
driveway connects to the back of the house rather than the front of the house.
That's, and then basically the garage that you suggested coming in from the other way, turn it 90 degrees so the door faces out.
That's acceptable to me. And the large maple tree doesn't look like it's, it has like some rot at the crotch.
Yeah, it's a big tree.
It is a big tree.
48-inch tree, and
So-
it's blooming on top, and it's coming out now. So
Yeah.
the one on the corner where you require a site easement is, that doesn't look so healthy.
Yeah, so I'm just suggesting if you have to take the spruce tree down, you might replace it with another tree on Judson.
And we've
Along the
talked about
frontage.
that, and we'd be willing to do that.
Okay,
Mr. Johnson?
that's the extent of my comments.
Mr. Russo?
So as for every project, we would require an I&I study, an inflow and infiltration study be conducted of the existing dwellings and the property. As Mr. Watson discussed, they are going to have to shift the driveway slightly. The zoning doesn't allow for the driveway to be within 5 foot of the sidelines. So they're going to have to take a look at that. And drainage, there are concerns with drainage on the site, coming off the site. I know there's an area marked proposed drainage on site, so we've just asked for you to expand what's proposed for drainage on this site.
May I just ask a question? I don't see that very well, and I forgot my computer, so my projectionist might like to leave if it's okay with you. That just shows the subdivision. I'm sure you have copies in your packages, but if we could let him, thank him for his time and let him go, that will disappear.
Is he poking you with a stick in the back? REA.
Thank you.
Just quickly around the board, any comments? I think the only thing we can do tonight really is declare ourselves as an agency.
Thank you.
That's pretty much it.
Yep, authorized circulation of notice of intent
Yeah,
to declare
that's pretty
yourself.
much all we can
Yeah,
do.
okay,
All right.
agreed.
Anybody?
Motion.
I just want to note that I've heard a lot of neighbors' concerns on this property, and what I'd like us to have the opportunity to do is really understand how groundwater and the drainage are being handled in the site so that they aren't a impact on the neighbors.
So we have a motion on the table with Joe?
Motion, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, and just to Kevin's point, the board did receive two, I think it was two, right, at the two public comments. So those comments have been received. Board has reviewed them. They're part of the record.
Can I have a clarification? Just-
Yeah, sure.
The garage, so the garage is it my understanding you're going to move it back? Is that what you just
Well,
agreed to?
that's among the things we're talking about. And I agree that that's the most logical place.
They're still
Yeah.
evaluating what to
Right.
do.
I would also support that change.
You could also help site drainage by, on the existing house on the northern proposed lot, has an incredible amount of asphalt in front of the building. The whole front yard is asphalt, in front of the garage, in between the garage. So you could help drainage in the neighborhood by reducing some of that asphalt
Right, well,
and making an actual driveway as opposed to an asphalt field.
Thank you. We'll certainly
Tying-
look at that.
Right, thank you.
Well, I would also take a look at tying the roof leaders in and whatever else you can. I know there's a base.
Have you looked at
right
the,
there.
Right.
have you looked at the street view? Because
yeah, no,
the site is like elevated, like a layer cake.
Yeah, coming
And
off
it's
of
got
Union, yeah.
one kind of like lonely looking, street grate at the corner of it, but
Right.
looking downhill, it's just a massive sheet flow, adventure for anybody living downstream of it.
Right, and the neighbors complain already. So Mr. Watson is going to be looking at that. He'll expand upon the drainage that is there and where it goes to. So, and the more we can get into the system sooner so that it's not overland surface flow down to the neighbors, the better.
Great, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
Our zoning board of appeal meeting doesn't look like there's anything really that impacts us inside of there. So I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Motion.
Second.
Aye.
I don't even know that. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion
Well done.
to